All right, what's going on? Drive time Friday afternoon. We are looking at about 16 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. Got a little loose on Crosstalk today with Sean. So we're a little late today on a Friday, but happy Friday to you. Great to have you along for the ride as it is every single day. Spence Checketts behind the mic. That is Porter Larson producing the show behind the glass. Busy news day, man. Busy news cycle today, both locally and nationally. Of course, the University of Utah football program has a new offensive coordinator. The hire came down last night after we signed off air. Utah State has a new head coach, a familiar name, now back on the college football scene. Conference championship weekend in college football starts tonight. Week 14 of pro football started last night with a really, really good Thursday night football game. Utah Jazz in action tonight as well, taking on the Blazers. They're on the road. And, yeah, a lot to do. Busy day. Busy day in pro basketball, college football, pro football as well. A lot going on this Friday afternoon. Happy Friday to you. Congrats, you made it. It is weekend time. A lot to do on the program today. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass. We got a good guest list for you guys today on a Friday to discuss all of the storylines that you want to hear about, both locally and nationally. Get you ready for a busy sports weekend ahead. Start things off with Dave McMenamin, a little NBA Daily Assist style. A celebrity reporter from ESPN. Covers the NBA and pro basketball right now locally. Topically, it's rough. It's a rough scene. But, of course, we are now past Thanksgiving, high speed ahead to Christmas. Time of year where you try to look and kind of understand what sort of landscape we have in front of us in the NBA right now. So we'll bring Dave on today on a Friday afternoon. Move over to Zach Harper as well. Do a little more NBA with Zach. Neil Smith stops by to talk some Utah Hockey Club. The Utah Hockey Club has been off all week long. They'll be back in action coming up this weekend. So we'll do a little hockey on the program as well. And then we're going to do some college football. Diana Sabu, the athletic director from Utah State, will stop by. And then we'll preview the college football weekend ahead and talk both local and national college football with our buddy Max Brown. On a Friday afternoon, we have Dave McMenamin, we have Zach Harper, we have Neil Smith, we have Diana Sabu, we have Max Brown, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and that guy, Porter Larson, on a Friday. Happy Friday. We have a new offensive coordinator for the University of Utah and potentially a new quarterback. So we've been waiting all week, and sure enough, the news comes down on Thursday night / Friday morning that the Utah coaching staff for now is complete. What's your reaction?
Yeah, man. Obviously, they finally get it done, and getting it across the finish line was big after kind of falling flat on candidates number 1 and 2. And I think for Utah, getting this thing rolling during the offseason is big, especially when you're trying to court young talent to bring into your locker room. As we know, year to year, it is a different ballgame than it was just a couple of years ago. So, for Utah, it's a big deal. As of Jason Beck, the play caller, the OC, I still got to dive deeper into the New Mexico stuff, but the production's there. The production's pretty good, and he's got a fairly good history with quarterbacks, including the guy that is there right now and is currently in the transfer portal. So there's a lot to get to there that we can unpack during the course of the show. But ultimately for Utah, just making sure this didn't drag out any longer is probably the biggest plus on this Friday.
Yep. Excuse me. No doubt. So we'll react to that, react to the news that Bronco Mendenhall is back on the scene as well with a busy Friday show for you guys to help get your weekend started out the right way. All right, our first guest will be Dave McMenamin, our buddy from ESPN who covers pro basketball. But before we get to Dave, on a Friday, courtesy of our friends at Standard Restaurant Supply, stop by their location downtown or online at standardrestaurant.com. On a Friday, it's time now for your opening tip. So after hearing no from their first 2 candidates, according to reports, Ben Arbuckle and Mac Leftwich, University of Utah, I don't know if you want to say settled on their third option, but they have made a hire with Jason Beck, who is a former BYU quarterback and, of course, was with Bronco Mendenhall, not just in New Mexico, but also at Virginia And, ultimately, the question is going to be, can the production that Coach Beck and potentially his quarterback, Devin Dampier, who is in the transfer portal and who had a very dynamite season for the most part, threw some picks, but that's the deal. If he ends up at the University of Utah, if Devin ends up at the University of Utah following his offensive coordinator from New Mexico, it's just simple. Can they duplicate what they did at New Mexico in the Big 12, P4 football? They were the fourth best total offense in the country, 484.3 yards per game. They really ran the football well. I would imagine that was something that Coach Witt was very, very interested in, because we know how Kyle believes football should be played. About 253.6 yards per game, fifth best running team in the country. And they had a really good rushing quarterback in Devin Dampier, who's now in the transfer portal. He had 19 rushing touchdowns and about 1,100 yards, a little more than that. Eli Sanders, their running back, is also in the transfer portal, had over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns of his own. So we've been waiting all week, and now that we know the deal, now it's just kind of left for time to manifest whether or not this was the right hire. I don't do the whole, did you win the day? Did you win the press conference? And anybody who is cracking a microphone today to celebrate or dismiss this hire is an idiot. We just don't know. Only time is going to tell whether or not this was the right hire. And if the reports are true that this is option number 3 for Utah football, what does that do for the motivation of Jason to prove that he is the right guy? It's another hire with this odd BYU-Utah cross-pollination coaching staff situation with these relationships that is one of the most unique parts of potentially the most unique college football rivalry in the country, as Jason played down at BYU back in the day, and he has a ton of ties to BYU. And, of course, a ton of ties to Bronco Mendenhall, who today was announced as the new head coach of Utah State. Now, Bronco, very interesting guy, and has done, I would say, a very, very good job at every stop that he's had. I don't think there's any doubt whether or not Bronco Mendenhall knows how to coach football. And it'll be interesting to see what his stamp looks and sounds like up at Utah State now that he has been hired. We are going to talk to their athletic director coming up in just a little bit to talk about how the process went down. Bronco, the person, is an interesting thing to consider, at least in my opinion, because Bronco, the person at BYU, for anybody that was around back when he was the coach there, was a far cry from Bronco, the person, prior to taking the BYU job, and a far cry from Bronco the person since he left Brigham Young. Now, it's a unique job. It's an interesting job. And obviously, Bronco was asked to clean up after Gary Croton, kind of like cleaning up after a Led Zeppelin party. That program was really left in shambles. And what Bronco did is kind of, I would say, re-implement and bring back the classic Brigham Young culture that seemed to have been lost under Gary Croton down there. And did a good job at BYU and was very honest with his departure and his way out the door, how he thought that independence was simply not sustainable. And look, he also tripled his salary going from BYU to Virginia. And then he took some time off, went up to Montana. I believe he did a lot of fishing, hung out up on his property up there, got back into coaching at New Mexico. And now he ends up back in the state of Utah to coach Utah State. And I'm laughing for a couple of different reasons. I don't know that this has any direct tie to anything that Coach Witt would want to do with his future plans. I just know that the relationship between those two when Bronco was at BYU was icy at best. Bronco's 58, I believe. Obviously, Kyle's a little bit older than that, 65 years old, I believe Coach Witt is. So there still is this conversation surrounding the future of Coach Witt and what it looks like up on the Hill. I'm going to maintain what I've said all week long. He's a coach under contract. Okay. And when you're a coach under contract, you don't have to call a press conference to announce you're coming back. You just show up to work and do your job. So I believe as a result of no official announcement this week concerning the future of Kyle Whittingham, it simply draws a straight line to Kyle being back on the sidelines for Utah football next year. But Bronco Mendenhall back on the coaching scene in the state of Utah, reportedly a 6-year contract. He's going to be paid $2 million and change over the course of the start, and then it's going to escalate over the course of those 6 years. So feel bad for, all of the kids up at Utah State that had to deal with the coaching situation. Obviously Coach Dreiling, I kind of feel bad for him, but ultimately it's a cutthroat business. So 2 big pieces of news hitting the local scene today as the University of Utah has hired Jason Beck as their next offensive coordinator, and Utah State has hired Bronco Mendenhall to lead the way up there. But a lot to get to today. We have conference championship weekend in college football. We have week 14 in pro football. We also have the NBA starting to take shape a little bit because we're in the holiday season. So coming up on the other side, we'll catch up with one of our favorites, talk some hoops. It's Dave McMenamin. Not going to lie, man. Now that Curb is over, Dave's intro kind of makes me sad because back when Curb was on air, we'd have Dave on, we hear the bump, and it's like, yep, Sunday night, little LD. And I will say, if you've never done a Curb rewatch, start to finish, it is a very rewatchable program.
Yeah, you can rewatch it whenever. It's still going to be funny, but yeah, there's a different feel. Now, to be clear, Spence, he has, Larry speaking here, has stopped doing the show like every season they've done it. So, hey, who knows? I know he's old, but we may get like an episode or like a special or something at some point.
Dave, have you filled the void? Have you filled the Curb Your Enthusiasm void since it went off air?
I went last night to worship at the altar of LD in person. He's doing a Conversation with Larry David tour around the country, and he did it in Hollywood, Florida last night. I was in Miami. Normally I would fly into the next city the day before the game, but there was no practice going on in Atlanta, so I stayed over in Miami, went to the show last night, flew to Atlanta this morning, and it was fantastic. It was like 2 hours, first hour, him and Jeff Schaefer, the producer of Curb, telling stories about how the show came to be, Larry working for SNL, Larry working for Fridays, Larry obviously with Seinfeld in his early days, and then for the second half, they brought out Susie Essman, who played Susie Green, and J.B. Smoove, who played Leon Black, and they were just a riot. It was fantastic.
Well, as much as I'd love to talk about a Patty Mills, Drew Eubanks pick and roll, Dave, I don't know that I want to talk about anything else other than wait. So are they doing this all across the United States? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
There's at least like a dozen dates, I think, and one of my cousins, he's a big Curb guy too, and so we kind of looked at the schedule when it came out and saw which one we could try to hit together. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's coming to Salt Lake, but I mean, I don't have the schedule memorized, but certainly recommend going to it. And he's super sharp. Like he hasn't lost an inch of his fastball, unlike the other star that I cover on a daily basis. It was just they leaned into knowing that this audience will be the type of, brilliant weirdos that really enjoy the show. So it started with like a 20-minute highlight clip of all the best Curb moments. So everybody's already in an amazing mood when he came out on stage.
So ultimately, I heard the dismissive tone when you said Salt Lake. I'm sure the small market once again will be left out in the dry, and we won't get to see it. I might have to fly home to New York or something. But I also noticed the thinly veiled shot on one LeBron James, and also referring to yourself as a crazy, brilliant person. There was a lot there, Dave, in that answer. But where are we at right now with the Lakers stuff? I was watching the Heat game the other night, and they weren't even getting back on defense. They just got throttled. Eric Spoelstra, most people believe if he's not the best coach in the NBA, he's one of the 3 or 4 most, best coaches in the NBA. And obviously, JJ's very new at this. So what's the conversation sound like right now as after a pretty promising start, LA's come crashing hardcore down to the ground?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple free throws against the Orlando Magic away from being 11-4, and now they've gone 2-6 of the last 8, and they're about to play an Atlanta Hawks team tonight that's won 5 in a row, including 2 of those games against the Cavs, who have been the hottest team in the league. So they have more than their hands full right now. One of the conversations I had with some of the guys in the locker room in Miami was like, we got to, as a group, get accustomed to getting a team's best shot. That's what it is to be a Laker. That is what it is to kind of be on a LeBron James team. Sometimes a team needs to get reminded by it, because the Minnesota team that they played earlier on in this trip, that was a better Minnesota team than we've seen most of the year. That Miami team, Jimmy Butler made sure he came back into the lineup for it, and was a better Heat team. When they played at Phoenix, Phoenix snapped like a 5-game losing streak, made sure they got Durant and Beal back in the lineup for that game. So you got to get your competitive kind of spine ready for this type of challenge on a nightly basis. And, I'd say somewhat that's LeBron included, because, okay, yes, I am a realistic person. He's year 22. He's going to turn 30 in a couple weeks. He's turn 40 in a couple weeks. You can't expect him to be the same guy he was a decade ago. That said, some of the things that he's been doing, particularly I think the most egregious thing he's done to this team so far is the turnovers, because he wants the ball in his hands more. He has been running what JJ wanted, but particularly when Austin Reeves went out, he's like, okay, I can kind of organize this thing. And of course he can. He's one of the best to ever do it in terms of breaking down a defense. But when he's turning the ball over and putting them in a compromised position, having to run back 3-on-2, 4-on-3, and the other team constantly charging at them in transition, when even in the best of circumstances, say after a missed shot, LeBron's not necessarily sprinting back in transition, that's hurt them. And then so he owns his piece of the blame pie. And to his credit, he didn't want to hear anything about the coaching staff being to blame after the Heat loss. He said it was all on the players.
So, look, you know the deal these days with NBA accounts and internet reports, and you cover the team, so I'll take it from you more than anything else. But you do see and hear things about, players maybe questioning whether or not JJ's the guy. And look, this is the first portion of the season, and he's never done this before. The hire was curious to me at the time. It still is, quite frankly. And yes, I know this is a players' league in large part, but a good coach can make a lot of difference. So are you hearing anything about anyone in that organization kind of looking around and going, wait, did we really do the right thing by hiring a guy that's never coached pro basketball before?
No, honestly, I haven't. And, this is something that I've kind of checked in on along every kind of step of the way from the time they hired him, through the early success and even through these struggles, because again, it is J.J. Redick as the head coach, but there's a staff that includes Scott Brooks and Nate McMillan, two guys who have done just about everything as coaches in the NBA. McMillan's led teams to the playoffs 11 different times. Scott Brooks, obviously, former coach of the year, led the Thunder to the NBA Finals. These guys are advising J.J., and so I don't think, like, on its face, J.J. Redick is being seen as a problem. Now, you could say, have there been, little things that have been wondered about, when they had a healthy Jackson Hayes, we didn't really see much of a too big lineup with Hayes and Davis in there together. That's something that Anthony Davis has wanted to play with, Now, that doesn't make JJ unique. Darvin Ham rarely played two big lineups also, but there are little parts of basketball philosophy that come up, of course, but I haven't been hearing about they're tuning this guy out, or they've lost belief that they can get it done with him, particularly, so I'll give JJ credit here, someone who has constantly kind of made an effort to have his back is D'Angelo Russell. And D'Angelo Russell was kind of the first major move that JJ made with his starting lineup, where he put him off the bench after they went 1-4 on that early 5-game road trip. And they responded by winning 6 in a row. And D'Angelo took it in stride and said, he's here to do whatever his coach asked him to do. So, I think anytime a team is in a free fall like it is right now, there's got to be fingers pointed, and certainly the people online are pointing mostly to LeBron and JJ, and now as of late Anthony Davis, because he only has 20 points combined over those last 2 games when he was averaging 30 for a month. But I think I haven't been given any indication that this is going to be a short tenure with JJ Redick as a coach.
What about JJ himself? I mean, I don't listen to all of his post-game pressers. I see the stuff you guys run on the daily shows, and then whatever is kind of making its way around the highlight shows. Does he sound like a guy that's resolved? Does he sound like a guy that is in over his head? Is he surprised at the challenges that this job provides that he didn't see coming? What's like the messaging coming from JJ himself?
I would say just reading body language and kind of obviously being there for all those post-game pressers and hearing what he has to say. He has – I mean, this guy, he was shaking mad when they lost their first game in Phoenix when they had started off 3-0. Like, literally shaking mad. His face was red, beet red. and his body was like convulsing when he went through his post-game presser, trying to digest that first loss that he took as a coach. Now that he's taken quite a few of those losses, and certainly a bunch in short succession, you don't see that same dying on every loss intensity. But I think he's perplexed. This kind of all started around the time they played Denver and were blown out in the second half. And obviously, we all know the history between the Lakers and Denver. It's a team they just can't seem to get over the hump with. Denver's now beat them 13 out of the last 14 times. And after they reviewed film of that game, JJ said, he kind of dismissed it and let his guys off the hook. He said, that wasn't us in the second half. We weren't competitive, but that was an aberration. That wasn't us. During this stretch, he's now gone back to those comments he made to them and said, maybe I was wrong. Maybe that is us. Maybe I misjudged our group. Now, that could be some reverse psychology going on. It could be some also like coming down to earth that just because you speak and communicate the game really well, and just because you are so passionate about the game, you basically have the same roster that the guy who was fired had last year. So, are you a magician? I think, again, the people online that are criticizing people, a next place where I think you're going to see a lot of fingers pointed is going to be the Lakers front office.
All right, speaking of being a magician, I pride myself on being a professional. And when you first started coming on this show 5 years ago, we had a Jazz team that was interesting to talk about with Donovan and Rudy and a good team and a good coach and Quinn Snyder. And my greatest magic trick this year will be trying to make this team interesting in our consistent hits, because there just isn't a lot of things that are interesting about the Jazz right now. I'm sure you're going to be grinding Jazz Blazers tape tonight, so I won't ask you about that until after you've watched the film. But I will ask you, just because of your knowledge of pro basketball and how these things work, just generally speaking, some dynamics. And I'll start with their top 10 pick, Cody Williams, who is now in the G League. Now, ultimately, this year is about development. It is about the young players. And after Taylor Hendricks broke his leg, Will elected to give the bulk of those minutes to Cody, and it looked horrible. He was not ready. He's not physically ready to play against men in pro basketball. He has to put on weight. He's been fine in the G League. And when you look at the history of the G League, there are some good players that spend a good bulk of time down there, Gobert, Pascal Siakam, but there aren't a lot of top 10 picks, Dave, that end up cutting their teeth down there. So just the dynamic of the highest draft pick the Jazz have made over the past couple of years, now cutting his teeth in the G League. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it causes you some pause. You look at someone like, you talk about the Blazers matchup. They have Scoot Henderson being a guy who spent a lot of time in the G League last year, and you're like, oh, is that an indicator of future success? I do think that there are organizations will draft a guy and see it more as a project, and also see that, let's just say that the Jazz are going to start peeling away a bit in order to, try to put themselves in a better position for the draft. Is Cody Williams going to get better experience there or G League games for a team that may be competitive? I'm not saying that this is the case for him specifically, but I can understand the concept of putting a guy in a situation where you got to get him a lot of reps, and that other squad maybe only have the agenda of winning every night, that you can play him there. And again, I am not speaking specifically to the Jazz and suggesting that they are already starting to peel stuff back. I do think they are going to start peeling stuff back, and I think you're going to see it come December 15th onward, when trades start to be made, that weekly, if not daily, we're going to hear about trade scenarios involving the Jazz, because they do have a handful of players on amenable contracts that could help contenders out there.
Yeah, no, I do want to get there in a moment, but one more thing here, because, based off of your experience of covering teams, and you've been pretty lucky to cover really, really good teams ultimately, but I'm sure throughout the course of your career, you've covered several teams that find themselves in a precarious spot where they're looking to potentially maintain draft capital in the name of results. And the fan base around here is used to really good teams. I mean, it's never been a championship team, but it's usually good, usually competitive. This might be the worst team we've ever had here. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I actually mean that. I mean, they don't do anything well. They're the worst defensive team in the NBA for the second straight year, number 26 in offense. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the fine line of developing players and letting them play through their mistakes when they're playing against NBA competition, and the danger of allowing losses to seep into their consciousness, and suddenly it becomes like who you are as a player. It's one thing to develop. It's another thing to get your head kicked in every night. And the Jazz are kind of dancing that dance this year.
Yeah, it's really tricky. One, I have covered, I have been fortunate to cover really a lot of great teams, but I remember covering a Lakers team that went 27-55 shortly before I moved to Cleveland. And when you're talking to Lakers front office people about someone like a Kendall Marshall back then, the former UNC point guard, and he's putting up, 14 points and 9 assists on a team that keeps losing, they don't really know how to evaluate it. They're like, has he shown growth? Is he getting better? Is he a valuable asset that we want to have part of our long-term plan? Or is he putting up numbers because somebody's got to put up numbers because we have so many warm bodies to fill out, a 48-minute game. And that will be a challenge for the Jazz front office. It's going to be certainly a challenge for Will Hardy. For someone, again, we have both, I think, talked about our admiration for the way he does the job and belief in his future potential as a real difference maker as a coach in this league. But this could change kind of his growth and trajectory as a coach. And, again, if you are then deciding maybe that some of these younger pieces aren't going to be part of your future, are you also kind of tanking their value in terms of future trades? So it's a tough thing to do over a repeated amount of time. You hope if you take a step back, it's like one step back, 2 steps forward, and the gain from it is a top tier prospect in what figures to be a stocks draft in 2025. But it's certainly something worth, kind of noting, circling, and talking about that you're playing with fire a little bit if you sustain this type of environment too long.
So you reference Will, and I concur with what you just said, and you and I have talked before about our respect and admiration for him, and that doesn't just come from me. I mean, we had Jeff Van Gundy on the show the week after he was hired. Jeff coached with Will, USA Basketball. It seems like everybody who has worked with Will or who knows Will believes that the Jazz have a star. But I wonder, Dave, how long he will put up with entering a gunfight with a knife every night. He's 72-113 as a coach. That's a winning percentage of 38%, and they're not close. They've picked up the option for year 4 next year and then year 5 for the year after that, and there's only 30 of these jobs, right? So, of course, he's part of the plan and understands the deal, but if he really is that good, if he really is that bright, is there a danger when you don't award him with the talent to compete of him maybe not being long for this whole situation?
Oh, certainly. If not the case of him looking elsewhere, certainly there's the potential case of, this gives his agent all sorts of ammunition in the next negotiation. They're like, you gotta pay this guy. Like, you have, this was not the deal when we signed here. This is not what we are anticipating. And this is painful for my client to go through, and he's going to be a good soldier and continue to work with you guys on the overall vision and plan. But he's got to be compensated for what's occurred, or we will see what other interest is out there. So certainly you're creating that situation for yourselves, leverage-wise, when you get down the road there. But yeah, on the kind of more extreme scenario, it could happen. The thing is, he has such a rare type of sterling reputation that, only having a 38% winning percentage that's surely going to get lower, certainly over this season, if not over the next couple seasons. I don't know if it would really affect his marketability or desirability on the open market. I still think there'll probably be teams certainly lining up to have him come in for interviews, if not give him offers. And it's something I don't know. Like it's something that if I was in his shoes, and I'm at that stage of my career, and I have this momentum considering where I worked before I came to Utah. I don't know how much of a stomach I have to continue to go through this type of process. Now, again, come June 21st or something like that, and they end up with a top 5 pick that looks like a franchise changer. I think a lot of those tough nights, you say it was worth it.
All right, Dave, before I set you loose, as you alluded to, December 15th, right around the corner. And look, I'm not like a huge John Collins guy, but the following sentence is true. As of right now, John Collins is a 50, 40, 90 player. That's a real thing. So John Collins, Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, those are probably the names. They're not trading Markkanen, obviously. They can't trade him, even if they wanted to. So if you're an opposing GM, are any of these quote-unquote vets? I mean, John's only 27. It's not like Collins old, but I don't think they fit the timeline. And Jordan Clarkson hasn't looked good in about 2 years now. But are any of these vets appealing that the Jazz would certainly trade willingly come December 15th and then beyond?
Yeah, I think Sir Sexton will have some value. A guy, again, who competitive fire is pretty apparent, who can shoot to the outside and guard straight up on the perimeter. There'll be a market. They have 3 bigs in Filipowski and Kessler and Eubanks, and 4 teams out there searching for a lone big. There's be calls about all those guys, and we'll see if, that's the smart move by the Jazz front office, picking up someone like Eubanks when they already had 2 bigs because they took Filipowski in the draft. That this puts them in all sorts of conversations because, okay, maybe you want our big, maybe you don't necessarily want Clarkson, but you could talk yourself into him, and now there's a sweeter offer coming from that big. So, I think I would extend the conversation and include the bigs. Not that I've been given any indication they'd be giving up on any of them because, for the Jazz record being as kind of poor as it is, I think those 3 guys have shown some spots of effectiveness. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't being hyperbolic. I think the Jazz are going to be in all sorts of trade discussions as soon as December 15th rolls around, and they're kind of going to be in the catbird seat because I think there'll be a lot of teams calling, and so I don't think they'll have necessarily the need to make a decision right away. They can canvass and see what's coming in, and just wait towards early February before they decide how they want to play it.
Dave, thanks, buddy, for the time. Have a great weekend. We'll chat soon. Okay, be safe.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, Dave McMillan covers the NBA for ESPN. Get him on Twitter. His Twitter is @MC10 is where you find him. I want to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks. We have Zach Harper joining us. We're going to do a little hockey with Neil Smith, and then college football the rest of the way. Diana Sabu from Utah State, their athletic director, Max Brown, for a comprehensive conference championship weekend preview in college football. Stay tuned for that. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. It's very easy to do. All you do is pick more or less on 2 players for a shot to win up to 200 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's /1 daily fantasy sports app. Here's how it works. It's really easy. If you've ever wanted to kind of try your hand at this stuff, you don't have to worry about the spread or the over-under or the money line or any of that. For instance, Jared Goff, more than 230 passing yards. Saquon Barkley, more than 1 touchdown. Travis Kelce, more than 70 receiving yards. Or Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards. So giving away free money. So get that and see if you like it. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. Zach Harper joins us coming up next. It's my most unfavorite bit we have on the show, by far, especially on a Friday when people are trying to get their weekend started out the right way. We have a lot of bits on the show, and this, by far, is our worst bit. By far.
I'm not a Pitbull guy,
By
but
far.
I don't know that we're not helping people get ready for the weekend.
Does it help your brand, Zach Harper, that in Salt Lake City, when people hear Pitbull, they think Zach Harper?
If any city, any town, city, anything thinks of me or thinks of Pitbull when the other one's mentioned or heard, that's the ultimate honor, especially getting the weekend going. This is weekend music.
All right. Well, he is Mr. Worldwide. I have to ask you right out of the gates because I have your Twitter pulled up. You did a Count the Dings pod, shout out.
Yeah.
One of the topics was things that make us feel old, and something manifests itself for me every day. What was the Zach Harper take on things that make you feel old?
One for me was anytime I'm like out at a grocery store, a restaurant, anything, a shop, and I am around a group of like young people, right? And just hearing them talk, it reminds me of how I was when I was that age and realizing like, oh, I didn't know anything and they don't know anything. And I don't know that I know anything now, but just being around that energy, I feel old energy when I'm around those people.
I was with my son and a few of his friends a couple of weeks ago, and they've never been to an ATM. Not once.
What?
They've never.
They don't do cash. Right?
They've never needed. These are young men in their early 20s. These are not 12-year-olds. They've never. Because for some reason I'm like, hey, I got to stop at an ATM, and they're like, wait, what? Like, you don't know what that. I'm old enough to remember when I needed cash to go to the bank and use a deposit, a withdrawal slip or write a check. And now these kids have never even been to the ATM machine.
I think the thing for me too is, a lot of places will now like do electronic payments for rent. And my building does not. I have to write a physical check. So that's like a grounding in the 20th century every time where I feel like, like this is how it used to be. It's almost like I think if I had to move to an electronic payment for rent, it would actually sadden me a little bit because I like writing out a check,
I don't think I have checks anywhere. I would have to look, but now everything is like Venmo. Everything's online. But I was stunned that adults in American society would have no frame of reference as far as, okay, you need cash. What do you do? They don't even know. So I thought it was a very good topic that you guys tackled. I'll have to check that out. How many pods are you currently recording right now? What's the workload?
It's a great question. I don't know. Let's just call it 4.
4. I feel like that's low.
It might be, but I 4. I feel pretty confident in at least 4.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I was gonna say let's get some Jazz stuff out of the way. There's nothing interesting, man, about the team. Ultimately, it probably is the worst team we've ever had here, and I'm serious.
Yeah.
They don't do anything well. But I will get your take on a dynamic we just discussed last hour with Dave McMiniman. And that is the conversation about Will Hardy, who seems to be like universally respected in pro basketball. And look, ultimately, as of right now, the old saying, you are what your record says you are. He's 72 and 113. The fact that he's almost won 40% of his games here is actually a miracle. It's 38% technically as far as the win percentage goes. He's got an option picked up for both next year and year 5, and they're not close to being good. Is there a danger here of the Jazz front office and their inability to get him high-level talent? Are they running the danger of maybe scaring off a really good coach? At some point, is he going to look around being like, dude, what are we doing?
I think as long as they communicate with him, as long as, you have to present a certain level of like, we're trying to win and we're trying to do this publicly, but if internally it's a clear line of communication on what the plan is, what's happening, I think that I would assume that he'll be fine unless another team just comes and throws an insane amount of money at him to try to lure him away, right? So if that doesn't happen, I wouldn't worry about scaring him off. Like I think I don't know. The whole conversation got really dumb about him after that timeout call because people were like, "But he scored." It's like 3 seconds after a timeout was called. Like like I get it, but it was such an obvious timeout call at the time. Because that's just what you do. And I think it, with like casual people don't really pay attention to the Jazz. I think it like skewed their perception of the coach. Like, oh, this coach is bad. But I think the people around the NBA know what the deal is with him, know what the deal is with the Jazz. And it wouldn't shock me if the team tried to pull him away. I just think the Jazz would be smart to make sure that that's not a possibility. I don't think it's a lack of talent thing. I think coaches recognize how few of these jobs there are, and if there is actual security with one team being offered in a secondary contract or even a third contract, I think that's enough to keep him. But the market will dictate what that is.
We're 9 days away from December 15th, and the Jazz, of course, are a team. Every time somebody writes the whole hey, watch out for these teams to potentially make trades, the Jazz are on that list. Any of these vets hold any interest? I mean, the weird thing, and look, if you're on an NBA team and that NBA team is bad and you've played in the NBA for a while and you're just alive with a pulse, you can put up numbers. But John Collins is legitimately 50, 40, 90 this year, believe it or not. So there's Collins, there's Sexton, there's Clarkson, who is just no longer the guy that he once was simply because he's older. Any of these vets hold legitimate value on the open market?
I mean, I think anything with anybody with 2 or fewer years left on their contract, especially with the dreaded second apron now, I think those are attractive assets of knowing, all right, we get the rest of this year and then it's an expiring next year. And so I think anyone like Collins is playing well. I've never been a John Collins guy, but he is playing well. He has played well for Utah, and I think actually in maybe a more consistent way than what we saw over the years in Atlanta, but also it's in Atlanta. So, I don't know how you actually judge that. But I think Collins would be someone that teams are excited about. I think Colin Sexton would. Jordan Clarkson, I don't know if they ever could have actually gotten a first-round pick for him, but that feels like that was a couple of years ago that was a possibility. But I think they have – this is the thing. I mean, the Jazz have been terrible, but they do have good veterans. They have good young players. I think that there's always a market there. I legitimately don't know how teams are going to approach it now that we've gone through one full offseason of this second apron and what that's going to mean for team building in the future. I think there are a lot of teams that are very hesitant about it. I think we're going to see New Orleans make some really tough decisions over the next couple of months because it hasn't gone well, and they don't want to be the Clippers who just keep saying, hey, if we're healthy in the playoffs every year, then maybe we can do something.
Yeah, so you brought up the Pelicans, and, Philly's got to figure something out as well. Who are the other teams that you think, because to your point with this second apron stuff, if you are an owner and you're writing a massive check for a team that sucks, then you're probably wanting to get out of that situation. Who are the most likely movers prior to the trade deadline based off of lack of production early on after about 20, 23 games?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if the Kings might have kind of like an itchy trigger finger there, right? Like they might start getting a little antsy because it hasn't gone well. I think, I don't know what flexibility Milwaukee could even have, but Milwaukee has to be looking at this and thinking, this is supposed to be so much better, right? Like this is supposed to be so much better, and it's not. I think teams like Houston and Memphis may have gone for big swings, but they've been so successful early on this season that's not necessary. Minnesota obviously doesn't really have the flexibility unless someone all of a sudden wants Julius Randle, which I don't think that's the case. Because New Orleans has been so bad, Utah's been bad. Portland's got some really interesting pieces. I think they should be looking to move a veteran or two if they can get any kind of assets back. But I think more teams are going to be buyers than sellers if they're not afraid of the apron, because that's what the play-in tournament kind of gives us.
All right, so one of the interesting dynamics here locally is most of the really good players who have gone elsewhere haven't necessarily excelled on a level that we expected, namely Hayward, who unfortunately broke his leg, and Darren Williams, who just never really figured it out after he left. But are we seeing Donovan? And, I'm going to keep revisiting this because every time I watch Cleveland, there is this level up type feel from Mitchell this year. The questions will have to be answered in the spring by his own accord. But 20-3, you don't just fall backwards into that. And I know it's not just him, but he clearly has been the main impetus. He's their best player. So are you ready to talk about Cleveland in a more real way after this crazy start? And specifically from Mitchell, what are you seeing?
I mean, yeah, I do take them more seriously, but I just don't know. I think Donovan has really impressed me where I'll be watching a game and it's, the first couple, 2-3 quarters, I'm like, all right, whatever. Donovan's good, but he's not doing anything special. And then he'll just go on those runs in the fourth quarter, right? Like it's just that reminder of like, oh yeah, this dude can get stupid hot and really like hurt a team. And so when he does that, like when he's that player, I believe in them more. They've also been super injured. Like that's kind of an underrated topic. This team has not been very healthy. They've been missing guys left and right. Like I just don't know. Like I don't know at what point before the playoffs I can buy in.
So do you feel, and the easy thing to say about the East is Boston and everybody else. I do think there's some bite to Orlando that is surprising to me. I mean, look, they're new in this cul-de-sac as far as winning basketball games. But is there anyone in the East come playoff time fully healthy that you think at least makes Boston nervous?
I do think New York has a lot of firepower, right? Their defense is not good, and I don't know if you can win with Cat as the main big man defensively. I mean, if their offense just keeps going crazy like this, I mean, it's historic right now. But I do think New York is dangerous. There's still part of me that believes in Milwaukee on some level, even though I don't believe in Doc Rivers. I just think that there's just too much talent there. I know it's a little top heavy, but I actually like a lot of their role players too. Like it should be so much better than it is. But I never bought Philly. Like I think Orlando's still probably a year and some shooting away. I think they need one more shooter. But no, like it feels like this is Boston's conference for a while, and maybe Cleveland disrupts that. Maybe they do. Like they played really well the other night. I know Boston was missing Jaylen Brown and Derek White, but that was a fun game and that was a good test for them. It feels like Boston would have to historically mess this up in order to not win the conference.
What does Philly do? Like, what's their course of action at this point? I know it's only 20 games, but obviously it's not working. And, man, it's just every time you get like a Philly alert, it's just bad news, whether a player's missing game or punching a reporter or whatever. Like, what's their course of action? Do they just have to ride this out?
Don't be dramatic media. It was just a shoulder push. Come on, it was just a shoulder push.
Okay.
I don't know. Like you're hoping and all you can do. I think that like what they have to do is one, they've got to cultivate just a defensive mentality, right? Like that has to be their calling card. Is they have got to create, even if it's just creating ugly games, they have got to create an ugly mentality that is relying on defense, and just that never goes away, whether Embiid's in the lineup or not. And so if they can get that identity, you can start carving away at some stuff. They don't have to be good in the regular season, but they do have to build, right? They have to build towards the end of the season and then avoid the Celtics in the first round. I don't even know that they could beat any of those other teams, top teams in the East right now in a seven-game series, but I know they can't beat Boston, whether they're healthy or not. And so as long as they avoid Boston, I mean, they probably need to avoid Cleveland too, but as long as they avoid Boston, if you're healthy when the playoffs start and you've got some momentum going, man, this just feels like a broken record every year with Philly, no matter what the machination is. But that's really all they can hope for, right? Like there's no getting out of this. You're committed to this roster. It's just not good.
Well, before we move out to the Western Conference, I have not asked you your opinion on the latest attempts by the NBA to fix the All-Star game with this different format, 4-team competition. We don't know much about how the players are going to be, picked, and I don't know what the format essentially is going to look like. We still have to wait for some of the details, but I always appreciate the attempt to clean something up that's so boring. People probably won't watch anyway, but do you like what they're at least trying to do with the revamped All-Star game format?
I think this year it's going to completely fix the All-Star game, and then nobody will care next year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened with the Elam ending, right? Like, they got that really good one right away, and then, hey, I got $200 million in the bank, and I don't really want to get hurt, and I don't really want to, go out there and bust my tail after hanging out all weekend in San Francisco or wherever they're going to be. They're in San Francisco this time, next year, wherever that's going to be, and, it's in L.A. next time. Yeah, the L.A. one's going to be a disaster. So now that I think so, that's going to be an absolute disaster. And so, I think anytime you fix the format, they'll get into it initially, but eventually that human nature is just going to take over. And I think that's the problem with the All-Star game is in today's world, that human nature is just not interested in trying.
Yeah, certainly when it comes to, pro basketball players now, and the money has changed everything, as we've discussed. But speaking of Los Angeles, watch the Heat-Laker game as long as I could. And, if it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to me. So after they went down like 40 or whatever, I just kind of turned it off. And look, I'm not laying all this at the feet of J.J. Redick. I just wonder if there's legitimate conversations to be had about whether or not hiring a guy that's never coached pro basketball to coach that roster with that dude was the right course of action through 22 games. What's the early return on the Lakers?
I don't know about JJ. Like, I'm not that impressed, but I'm not also looking at him like, what are you doing? I think we're now on the third coach in 4 years with pretty much the same roster. And, hey, they haven't figured it out. Maybe it's the roster. Like, maybe it's the fact, like, there's all this, like, stuff about, hey, the Lakers, they've been looking for shooters, and they put one around LeBron with Dalton Knecht. I'm like, yeah, he's good. He's a nice rookie. At the same time, they haven't been looking for shooters because they haven't signed any shooters over the years. I'm sorry, like, you can go get shooters if you want shooters. They have tried to put together a different thing around LeBron and hope that LeBron will make them shooters, right, by just delivering the ball like it's a video game algorithm. And that's just not how it works. Like, you have to go get shooters. Like, this front office is not doing a good job. Their big men are still Jackson Hayes and, like, I think Christian Wood's still on the roster. Like that, and Rui Hachimura, 6'8" Rui Hachimura is like a part-time center for them. That's not good. Like, they haven't done a good job of building any of this roster out. And so, yeah, JJ like talked about emphasizing threes, and they don't really shoot more threes than they did last year under Darvin Ham. Like, there are things to change, and there are things to tweak, and there are game plans you can implement and all that stuff, but the roster's still limited. And so I don't know how to, if we're going to kill Darvin Ham over it, then I guess you kind of have to kill JJ Redick over it. But I always looked at this as a roster construction issue rather than whether you think Ham's a good coach or not. I didn't think it mattered. I think the roster is just not capable of contending.
I really wonder what Scott Brooks and Nate McMillan are thinking sitting next to JJ Redick. They might just be grateful for a job, or they're probably like, dude, this guy has no clue what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, he might not, right? Like, he might, this might be like, bit off more than he can chew with this job. And it doesn't help that, like, 6 straight games, LeBron wasn't any good, right? That all of a sudden his 3-point shot went away. Like, I mean, this team is kind of teetering on certain things that can and can't happen. And when the bad things happen, I don't know that there's a fix. Like, JJ's talking about how they're not doing the basic stuff. Like, I mean, they're helping off strong side shooters and they're not rotating into the lane. Like, LeBron isn't in help ever, right? Like, AD, I've been on this AD's not that guy island by myself for years, and it's not that he's not good, but he's not going to lead a team to a championship, right? And so you have all these factors where you need it to be really fine-tuned, and then the second, like, some dust or sand gets wafted into the engine, it just falls apart. And I don't know that that's coaching.
All right, before I set you loose, you're uniquely qualified to react to, I'll just call it a epiphany I had the other night, because you are a movie guy and a basketball guy. And I was watching the Knick Magic game and watching Cat and, do Cat things. And look, he's uniquely skilled for a guy that's that big. And when it looks good offensively, it looks really good. But it just dawned on me that Cat reminds me of Will Smith. I don't know why, but that just hit me. That hit me. I
like where this is going.
Yeah, so I needed your reaction to this thought I had watching him the other night.
You mean more like present day Will Smith, right? Because
yes.
we got to remember the 90s, like he hit like 15 straight #1 movies.
Yeah, not Fresh Prince, okay. Modern day Will Smith.
All right, we're talking like After Earth and Beyond.
Yeah, slapping Chris Rock,
Yeah. No, I like this comparison a lot because you can always tell, like, even in the stuff Will Smith does now, you can always tell the charisma and the talent is there. Just the understanding of how to maximize that is not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And with Cat, that's all. Like, Cat has always known what to say, and he's so talented on the floor. It's why I didn't enjoy criticism of him as a player when he would say, like, I'm the best shooting big man ever, and everyone starts laughing. I'm like, look, I don't think you have to agree, but I don't think that's worthy of laughter either, right? Like, he is crazy talented. He is an unbelievable shooter. He has unbelievable basketball skills. offensively, but it is just there's a corniness now in not just the things he says, but the way he will try to do stuff on the court. Like he will go try to block a shot and completely sell out his team and his team defense in doing so, right? And it's there to like send a message, like I'm gonna go slap Chris Rock and send a message, and you're just left going, what happened? Why did you do that? That didn't help anything. And that's what I think you get a lot of that with Cat. And at the same time, he's so good that you're like, yeah, maybe it'll click this time.
It's the corniness. You landed on it. It's just like the unauthentic. Donovan's got a little bit of that too from time to time, as we've talked about. But it just dawned on me. I'm like, man, he's like Will Smith. Anyway, odd way to end the interview. Zach, I appreciate the time, man. Have a great weekend. All right.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right, Zach Harper from The Athletic, host of a bunch of different pods. Get him on Twitter at Talk Hoops is where you find him. He writes The Athletic's power rankings every week and does a bunch of different pods, both basketball, movie style with Cinephobe. So talented kid. Give him a follow and support his work. All right, the Utah Hockey Club hasn't played for like 3 years. They've been off all week. They're back in action. We'll do some hockey with Neil Smith. Don't forget, Utah State Athletic Director Diana Sabu stops by. Max Brown will give us a comprehensive college football conference championship weekend preview. And we'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock. We'll tell you what you can expect on the station after that. A little football coming your way. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. Utah football has a new offensive coordinator and potentially a new quarterback. Maybe we'll get to some of that coming up a little bit later. Bronco Mendenhall is back in our state as a head coach with Utah State. Their athletic director will be our guest on the other side of 4 o'clock, Diana Sabu. Max Brown will join us. We'll preview all the conference championship games in college football a little bit later on as well. The Utah Hockey Club has been off for like a year. Now they're going to be back in action coming up this weekend. But there is some big news around the NHL that we'll discuss with our next guest, Neil Smith, on a Friday afternoon. Neil, happy Friday, sir. How are you?
Happy Friday. I'm good. I'm looking forward to tonight. And Friday nights are always good, right? There's a lot to do.
Yes, sir. So the New York Rangers have just signed Igor Shesterkin to an 8-year contract extension. And the average value, according to the figures I'm seeing, $11.5 million. Now, he's one of the best goalies in the NHL. This has been a process, but now it's culminated in a deal. Neil, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, today has been a tough day in one sense because they after messing around with Jacob Trouba since the summertime, who's their captain, and trying to trade him in the summer, and now threatening to trade him, and now trading him to Anaheim, basically haven't been very nice to Jacob Trouba, the captain of the team, and the leader of the players in everything I'm reading and hearing. But then I guess when they were able to keep that cap money, they turned around and immediately signed the deal with Shesterkin for. Goalies haven't gotten paid that high. I don't. I'm not a GM in the league. I'm not looking at numbers, but that is a ridiculously high number for maybe the one of the top 3 goalies in the league.
So you referenced the Trouba deal. They receive a defenseman. I'm not going to pretend like I know anything about him, nor do I have any idea how to pronounce his last name, and a conditional 4th-round pick in 2025. That doesn't seem like a great haul for a player that seems to be as beloved as Trouba is. What do you make of the deal?
Well, they were just trying to get rid of Trouba without having to keep any money because they didn't want to keep money because they wanted to sign Shesterkin. So it's really sinful how they've treated Trouba, I think. I mean, he was a warrior for them for the last 5 years and really is the toughest guy they had on their team by far. But, they got back a player, a defenseman that they won't even probably use on New York. He's only played 130 games in his career. He was drafted by Boston in the first round and then, got dealt over to Anaheim or got to Anaheim and has really not played much there. He's only played 5 games this year. And they get a 4th-round pick as well, which is, minuscule. So the objective of Chris Drury and the Rangers was clearly just to relieve themselves of Trouba's contract, which has got just this year to go.
So any other names or teams we should be looking out for as far as big deals on the horizon? It has been a little bit of a funky start for some of the contending teams and surprising starts for others. Do you think we're going to see a lot of movement as far as the trade market in the NHL goes?
I think as the year goes on, you'll see more and more, Spence. I think it's really hard to figure out deals with the cap era, of trying to balance everything out. And some teams don't have a lot of cap space, and they don't want to take on players that are being paid too highly. Like Trouba, to be honest, was being overpaid. A lot of players are. He's not worth $8 million, and that's why the Rangers would have had a tough time moving him. Plus, he had his no trade contract, which he had to waive in order to go to Anaheim. So, no, I don't see any right on the horizon. I know a number of teams that, must be looking at doing something because they're in a bit of a skid and they're skidding out of the playoff contention.
We had Ali Mata on this week, the defenseman from the Utah Hockey Club, who is going to be participating in the upcoming tournament with the Four Nations face-off. And I was completely unfamiliar with this, Neil, so I asked him if it was the first time he's ever played in it, and he said, well, yes, because it's the first time it's ever happened. Give us the background on how this all kind of came to fruition and the type of tournament we can expect. And we got a couple of our local prospects playing for Finland.
Yeah, it's all NHL players. It's totally the NHL Players Association and the NHL that put this thing together. It's not. The countries aren't sending players to this. It's the NHL that are sending players to this based on nationality. So obviously, if you're Swedish, you play for Sweden, Finnish, and so on. And there's coaches for each team. It's a short one. It's about a week and a half. Every team will play each other. The problem for the GMs, and that's how I always look at it, is if you're Florida, you've got something like 8 guys going into this tournament. You don't want people getting hurt in this tournament and then can't participate for their club that's paying them. So that's always the problem with doing extracurricular hockey in the league, and the GM sit and worry about it because, for what I just said. So it's going to be an interesting tournament. It's going to certainly be entertaining. The players will play as hard as they can. Everybody likes to win for their country with their country's jersey on, whether you're American, Canadian, Finnish, or Swedish. But for the NHL teams, it's worrisome that none of your guys get hurt.
Over to the Utah Hockey Club, and there's this old saying in football where if you tell me you have 2 quarterbacks, you probably have none. And right now, there's a legitimate battle going on between Ingram and Vejmelka, the backup goaltender, the backup goalie. They both have played 13 games. Is this a situation from a general manager's perspective you'd like to have it settled on one, or are you fine kind of having it go back and forth?
No, you can play 2 goalies back and forth. It's gone on, and they've had a good year as long as those 2 guys like each other and they're cheering for each other. But you would like there to be a structure in place, just like you want a first-line center, second-line center, third-line center, your top defenseman pair. You like to have a structure to the team, and that goes right down to goaltending. But Connor Ingram certainly hasn't grabbed that mantle this year. He was given the chance to be the number 1 goalie, but as we all know, he hasn't fared that well this year, and Vejmelka has played pretty good. So, including getting that win against Carolina that we talked about last time I was on. So I guess for now they're going to have to go back and forth until they can get Connor's game to where they want it, so that he can get the bulk of the games.
So this continues to be a team, Neil, that simply ebbs and flows. Up and down. They had a great win against Vegas when they hung 6 on the Golden Knights on the road. Then they came home against the Stars. And to be fair, they pelted the Stars with like 36 shots. They just could not find the equalizer. But the past 6 games, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. And I don't really have a new question to ask you other than your current thoughts on why this team cannot find consistent form. We know they're young. We know it's a new market and there are some new players, injuries and such. But your latest thoughts on the up and down start of the season for the Utah Hockey Club.
Well, those last 2 games you mentioned, you got exactly right. They went in and they shocked Vegas. I don't know what was going on with Vegas losing 6-0 at home. Vegas is a good team, so they, 6-0 is a blowout in your own building. So give Utah all the credit on that one, and give them all the credit for 37 shots against a good Dallas team. But Casey DeSmith, the new backup actually to Ottinger this season. And Ottinger is one of the finest in the league, but they had Casey DeSmith in, and he just stoned Utah. He stopped 36 of 37 shots. And the one thing that I see, Spence, in their games that they got to improve is their power play. They're dreadful. They're in last in the league and on power play, and that's got to improve. You can't win in the NHL if your special teams, meaning power play and penalty killing, are down at the bottom of the league. It's really, really hard to start to put a string of games together if you can't score on the power play.
I know Coach Torney has tried a bunch of different shift changes, line changes, but you referenced the power play, the anemic power play attack, but also they're near the bottom of the league at penalty kill percentage as well. So what's the secret sauce there? As the coach has tried a bunch of different line changes, and to your point, it has to be better if they want to win consistently.
You know what? One thing is that coaches will admit to this, or they have to admit to it, that the one part of a hockey game that is coaching and that is structure and that is practiced over and over and over again is power play. And because you get out on the ice and you practice it and practice it and practice it to sort of pin down the other team's penalty killers and get those scoring opportunities. And the same thing with penalty killing. It's very structured of how you're going to do penalty killing. You've got usually 8 good penalty killers on the team, and then you've got your best penalty killer, which is your goalie, keeping the puck out of the net. And on the power play, you've got 10 guys. The first power play of 5, and then the second power play of 5, and you just got to keep working on it until it clicks. It doesn't take superstars to have a good power play. If you look in the league at whose power plays work, they're not necessarily the teams with all the stars. They're just the teams that have the best system to address that.
So let's, before I set you loose, a couple of questions about the Central Division in the West, which is where our Utah Hockey Club finds themselves. Winnipeg has come back down to earth, which I suppose was inevitable because their start was not sustainable. 4-6 in their last 10. So what has gone down with Winnipeg, or is it simply just regression of the mean because that start was so bizarre?
You know what it is, Spence? And this is a hard thing for fans or people to understand, but when you have a great start, or when you have a winning streak, as you keep winning, the further along you go, you're developing some bad habits within that winning streak, and suddenly you get to the bad habits overtake the good habits, and you lose a game, and now you go out and you go, okay, we got to fix this one thing, and then we didn't notice that this other thing was broken, and usually, and you can look back, it's factually true, a winning streak is followed by a losing streak, because again, you've fallen into bad habits. During the time that you could beat anybody any night, you took it easy on certain things. So that's what's really happened to Winnipeg. I have no doubt that they're going to be one of the top teams. They're still playing over 700 winning percentage. They're still a plus 29 in goal differential. They're going to be there at the end of the day, but they just, it's just tough, as you said, to keep that winning going that strong.
The new first-place team in the Central is Minnesota, who have really turned it on as of late. They've won 7 of their last 10, 7-2-1. They've won 4 straight. What are you seeing from the Wild that's allowed them to rise to the top of the table here in the Central?
Well, Kirill Kaprizov has been unworldly this year. I mean, he might be a candidate for the MVP of the league. He's got 39 points in 24 games, 16 goals. He's on fire every night, and you back that up with a young rookie that they've got, Matt Boldy, who's I think is going to win Rookie of the Year. He's second in scoring on that team. So those two guys jump out and grab things and get going. They're having a real good season there. And in Gustafsson, their goaltender, along with Marc-Andre Fleury, but Gustafsson in particular is having a really good year. And so I just think Minnesota, who I didn't expect to even be close to this good, having seen them miss the playoffs last year, are shocking a lot of people. That may be another thing too. You go into a building, you play a team, they think it's Minnesota, they're not going to be that great, and yet they come in and they beat you. So they've surprised a lot of people, including yours truly.
All right, let's get a preview of the road trip that the Utah Hockey Club will be taking this weekend. They had a massive break. They played on Monday, didn't play all week. Now they've got a back-to-back starting Saturday at Buffalo and then Sunday at Philadelphia. What do you make of their chances to come home from this 2-game roadie with maybe a little success?
Well, they should be able to come home with some success. Both Buffalo is a team that you never know what you're going to get from them. They're not a playoff team at this point in the Eastern Conference, and they don't particularly play well at home. They're not that great at home, so it's not like as if they're going to be a real warrior that's going to keep all the pucks out of their net at home. They're only .500 at home, and with Philadelphia. You get I think a well-coached team by John Tortorella, and he usually gets a bit more out of them than maybe they deserve. Again, they're 6-7-1 at home. They're not a great home team. So Utah's got to understand that these two teams, the fans will get on them if they can get a lead or if they can come out and give it to them, but they're not good home teams. So Utah's got to go in and understand that and know that they got a real opportunity here to do something with them, albeit they're going back to back. But they're not doing 2 games in 24 hours because the game in Buffalo is at 11 your time. The game in Philadelphia is at 5:30 your time, which is 7:30 Eastern time, and the game they will have played on Saturdays at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So if you see what I mean, they're not really playing a true back-to-back, but it is still tiring.
Where's the reputation of the toughest place to play in pro hockey in the NHL? Is there one stadium, arena that stands out, or are there a couple of places, just the reputation that's the hardest place to play on the road in the NHL?
I don't know that there's really one in this kind of league. I mean, Dallas is very, very strong at home, and it's hard to go into there. There's some Canadian buildings that are really hard. Utah beat Vegas 6-0, as we talked about. And one of the reasons I was so surprised is because people say it's hard to win in Vegas, and they're 10-3-0. So that was a bit of a shocker for everybody. But there's really, it varies from year to year. It's not like the old days when the Montreal Forum was hard to win in for anybody to go into the Montreal Forum and win. It's not really like that. It changes year to year. Carolina's got a real good home record. Toronto Maple Leafs have a great home record. But it's not like you go into those buildings like you went into the Philadelphia Spectrum and were like shaking in your boots. It's not like that anymore. So it varies year to year.
All right, Neil, last thing, and I'll set you loose, because I was interested for you to chime in on something we've discussed on the show for the past couple of weeks. And, the fact of the matter is the novelty has kind of worn off as far as attendance and enthusiasm for the hockey club here. The last few home games, a little sparsely attended. And look, it is a brand new project, okay? And the Vegas Golden Knights situation was an outlier because they were really good right away, which is hard to do. This is not an expansion team, but it is a new team. And I suppose in order to really carve out some real estate in a market that's dominated by college football and NBA basketball, you're either going to have to be really good and win a lot at a high level, or it's just going to take a number of years to really establish the Utah Hockey Club culture here in Salt Lake. You're a guy that's built rosters over the years. What's the secret sauce in pro hockey to keep a community engaged? How long does it typically take?
Well, you said it right, Spence. This is not an expansion team, so you can't compare this to Seattle or to the Vegas Golden Knights. This is the Arizona Coyotes that got moved into Utah, and so they take with it the Arizona Coyotes. Player development and acquisitions. And so this summer coming up will be the first year that I think that the new ownership, Brian Smith and his group, are going to get to dictate what they want to see done with the Utah Hockey Club, or whatever their name is, by this summer. And so it'll all be up to that, to the excitement, to creating excitement about this team. This is a good young team, but saying that isn't going to draw a lot of fans into the building if you don't win all the time. So you can have a nondescript team that's just a good, young, hardworking team, and if you win all the time, people will come. But if you don't and you're sort of back and forth, I think then it's going to take some big names or some star players or something to attract the fans that are deciding on whether they want to spend their discretionary dollars going to Utah hockey games. It is going to take time. It's not like Vegas, where they got the expansion rules, which gave them a good team right away, and George McPhee and his group did such a good job. Seattle has been pretty good, albeit not like Vegas, but they did make the playoffs and knocked out Colorado 2 years ago. So they've had some excitement in Seattle. We've always got to remember that this isn't expansion. This is the Arizona Coyotes, who haven't made the playoffs in years and years, and it got transferred into Utah. So it's going to take some time for ownership to navigate how they want this franchise to move forward.
All right, Neil, for all of our new hockey fans, the listeners out here, they're looking to learn more about the game and about the league. How can they find your podcast?
Well, they can find it anywhere on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, any of the podcasts, even on YouTube, where you'll get to see my beautiful face. It's called NHL Wraparound, and we have great guests, and we dissect everything every week. And we have a couple of shorter ones where we bring you up to date on what's gone on in between the big podcasts. So NHL Wraparound, find it anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Thank you, sir. Have a great weekend, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Have a good weekend, Spence, yourself. Take care.
All right, Neil Smith, former general manager of the Rangers and the Islanders, high-level scout for the Detroit Red Wings once upon a time. Definitely check out his podcast. The Utah Hockey Club is back in action this weekend with a couple of roadies. We got Buffalo, and then, as my computer refreshes, Philadelphia. So Buffalo tomorrow, then Philly on Sunday, back home next Tuesday against Minnesota. They're red hot right now. That's the first-place team in the division. Brought to you on a Friday by Overtime Cards and Collectibles, which is the best spot for all your football, basketball, hockey, MMA, and even Pokemon card collecting. You can buy all your favorites there and even take your cards in. Maybe you have some rare cards in your collection you don't even know about. Like I had a Kobe Bryant rookie card in my collection that I didn't know about, but my buddy Chris at Overtime was able to uncover it for me. Start thinking about the holidays, Christmas right around the corner. What gifts are you going to need to give for your friends and your loved ones? Check out the Overtime Cards gift card selection. Perfect stocking stuffer. They have all the best trading cards and collectibles around. Go check them out online at overtimecardsandcollectibles.com where you can buy and trade. All right, we got about 2 hours left in the show, and it's all college football the rest of the way. Coming up next, the athletic director from Utah State, Diana Sabu, stops by. She hired Bronco Mendenhall today. We'll talk about that process. Max Brown will stop by as well to preview college football championship weekend, and we'll talk about the new Utah offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, and maybe a new quarterback under center as well. So 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. Happy Friday to you. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. Is Neil Young good? This is honestly a debate I've had in my head over and over because my old man just it's the Eagles, Moody Blues, Neil Young. Like he liked all of these bands so much and they were overplayed that I honestly debate in my head whether or not they're good. Is Neil Young good? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
He's not like one of the best rock stars ever.
Mm-hmm.
He is for a particular taste, I would say. But if you've ever seen the guy live on certain performances, he's number one, writing all those songs, playing the guitar, playing the harmonica, singing. Not the greatest as far as the vocals go, but he's talented and a really, really good songwriter. Regardless of
Okay.
I think he's one that kind of picks some battles in the music world, which that happens.
No doubt about that. All right, there's been a mass exodus of football coaches from New Mexico to the state of Utah today. Jason Beck is your new offensive coordinator at the University of Utah. Utah, according to reports, had conversations with both Ben Arbuckle and Mac Leftwich. Ben decided to go to Oklahoma, and Mac stayed home in Texas to join Texas Tech. And now Jason Beck has been hired, former BYU quarterback. Did a really good job at New Mexico. So we'll discuss this coming up in just a little bit. And then Bronco Mendenhall is back in the state of Utah, taking the Utah State job. We're going to be joined by Deanna Sabo coming up to talk about this. She's the athletic director of Utah State. Max Brown will roll by as well to discuss both these hires and then give us a preview of conference championship weekend in college football, which gets rolling tonight. We've done some Jazz, some NBA, little Utah Hockey Club, but we've got about 2 hours left in the show, and it'll all be college football. So we'll be joined by Diana Sabo coming up in just a little bit. So the reaction to the Jason Beck hire has been interesting to me, and I talked about this during Crosstalk with Sean. Sean O'Connell, check out his show, our new midday host, taking over for Riles, who's now up full-time at the University of Utah. Jason Beck, according to the numbers, did a really, really good job at New Mexico. Of course, the question simply is this: will those numbers and will the production be able to be duplicated and replicated at a P4 level with the Big 12 now being the new reality? A lot of people drawing a straight line between Jason Beck and his quarterback, Devin Dampier, who is now in the transfer portal, as is their running back, Eli Sanders. And, we had Chris Camerani in studio yesterday, and I thought CK outlined it pretty good about the additions he thinks Utah needs to make as far as the talent level goes, talent acquisition, regardless of who the head coach is. If you don't have the horses, you don't have a chance. And, we still are waiting word on whether or not Cam Rising will be back for year 8. But it does appear that, if this is a straight line between Jason Beck and Devin Dampier, maybe that's an option to at least bring him in to see what sort of hand you've been dealt. Devin, through the air, was just okay. He threw 12 touchdowns, 12 picks. But what Jason wanted to do with his team is really run the football. And they were the 4th best offense in all of college football last year. Yards per game, 484.3 yards per game. But really, they wanted to run it. Highly effective ground game. 253.6 yards per game. That's 5th best in all of college football. So Jason spent a number of years as a coach after playing at BYU from 2004 to 2006. He stuck around as a grad assistant at BYU, then was the quarterbacks coach at Weber State, went back to BYU to coach the quarterbacks, and then went with Bronco to Virginia for 5 years. Spent a season as the quarterbacks coach at Syracuse, then was the offensive coordinator in 2023, and then went to New Mexico to reunite with Bronco and did a really, really good job. So I know a lot of people are talking about, and look, I know there are rumors out there. I can't corroborate any of these, nor do I do my show based off of people who are spreading rumors online, that ultimately the conversations with Mac Leftwich left him a little bit underwhelmed as a result of what's been characterized as a low-ball offer from Utah. I have no idea if that's the case. And I do think it's very fair to wonder whether or not the unknown nature, the ambiguity, I guess is how I'll put it, with the head coaching situation at Utah is something that got in the way for either Ben Arbuckle or Mac Leftwich. Honestly, I don't think, and we talked about this yesterday, I don't think Ben Arbuckle going to Oklahoma or Mac Leftwich deciding to stay in Texas is an indictment on the Utah job. I know it's been spun that way, but look, if you're from Texas, Texas Tech is not a bad job, and that's a school and a football program that has had a historic offense for a number of years. And yes, Mike Leach was there for a long time. May he rest in peace. But ultimately, I don't blame Mac Leftwich at all for simply wanting to stay in Texas. That's where he's from. That's where he lives. And if you had the opportunity, if all things being equal, and we could debate whether or not the Utah job is better or worse than the Texas Tech job, but their offensive pedigree is something that Utah's offense is just not and hasn't been, with the exception of a couple of years with a healthy Cam Rising under center and Andy Ludwig calling plays. This is not a football program known for its high-powered offense. And you just have to wonder how that comes into play with some of the decisions from skill position players as to whether or not they want to come play here. You know, we were talking about, Dorian Singer earlier with Sean during Crosstalk, and I guess Dorian Singer is the half-brother of Devin Dampier, the quarterback from New Mexico, who is in the transfer portal. And I can't speak to whether or not Dorian enjoyed his time here. I can only speak to what it must be like as a wide receiver, not having a quarterback to be able to throw you the football so you can show what kind of talent you have. Tim Patrick is balling out for Detroit. Had a great game last night. Devon Vele is Denver's number 2. And we never really saw much from those two here, and it's obviously not because of their talent. It's because of the inconsistency on the offensive side of the football with lack of continuity and health under center. So we'll see how this plays out. But I really think the narrative that's gone on that Utah swung and missed with Ben Arbuckle and Mac Leftwich is misguided. Oklahoma's a blue blood in college football. Mac Leftwich is from Texas. Probably just wanted to stay home. And again, if all things are being equal, don't move. Keep your family close to where you're at and simply just stay in your own backyard. And I'm sure Oklahoma was able to pay Ben Arbuckle a healthy amount of money. Again, that's a college football blue blood. So we have been waiting all week as far as the news to come down about who the offensive coordinator for the Utes would be. And it did come down official last night after we signed off air and was made official by the Utah Athletic Department today that Jason Beck will be on the sidelines calling plays for Utah football next year. Now, it does lead back to the conversation about Kyle, about Coach Witt, and I just continue to repeat this moniker in my belief in the situation that if Kyle wanted to step aside, we would know by now, and that announcement would have been made. And because there's been no announcement made, the logical conclusion is that he's simply a coach under contract who is coming back to Utah next year. I mean, that's the line I'm drawing. I can't speak for anybody else, and I don't think we need an official announcement when it's simply an employee under contract who's going to just come back and coach. Now, I do think it's fair to wonder whether or not that's the right thing to do. And as I have said a million times and will continue to repeat, in my opinion, Kyle has earned the right to go out on his terms when that is. It will be interesting to see what the noise is like if next year feels a little bit like this year. Now, of course, the injuries got in the way, and they've been getting in the way for a couple of years now. It's not 1 or 2 injuries. It's 4 or 5 to your quarterback position, and it's more than that throughout the course of the team. But how long can you just lean back on that as your excuse for lack of production? And like it or not, this is the downside of setting such high expectations. When those expectations aren't met, the community kind of wonders what's going on. The fan base wonders what's going on. The narrative of Utah football fans being disengaged turned out to be entirely incorrect. I was at every home game this year, and the fans showed up, and the stadium looked good. Were there some lean moments where you looked up at the top of the stadium and didn't see it completely sold out? Maybe, but it's still a very engaged community, a very engaged fan base that cares very much about Utah football. And so that ultimately was the news that broke earlier today. I'll tell you what I find a little bit more interesting as we wait for Diana Sabo to join us, the athletic director from Utah State. Don't forget Max Brown later on. We talk about everything in a vacuum as far as what's going on right in front of us. What I find to be more interesting is where Utah football finds itself in the landscape of more of the macro viewpoint of the future of college football. and what it's going to look like. And I continue to say in 4 to 5 years, again, on a daily sports talk radio show, your job is to analyze the news cycle and topically what's going on in front of you. So we don't do a ton on this topic as far as where Utah football is placed and positioned to make sure that when the sport does change, probably this time for good and probably for the better because of the chaos where we find ourselves. And yes, I will recycle topically the model that we've talked about on the show for years now, quite frankly, and college football writers have written about for years as well, about the inevitable movement of college football to a pro model and college football probably breaking away from the NCAA, to create their own standalone business because it is a multi-billion-dollar business without a CEO. And I promise you, there are private equity guys chomping at the bit to get involved here and to get involved on the ground up with member institutions individually, not necessarily invest in the entire project. I promise there are private equity bros ready to invest at the ground up to make sure that the institutions they love are in the right spot when this sport actually settles into what the future is going to look like. I want to get back to this in a little bit because there's a Utah topic that I want to get to. But the athletic director from Utah State, Diana Sabo, good enough to join us on a Friday. Diana, happy Friday. How are you?
Hi, thanks so very much. Doing great. How are you?
I'm well. I appreciate the time. You have a new football coach, and it is a football coach that we're all very familiar with as Bronco Mendenhall, once upon a time, was the head coach of Brigham Young. He is now your head coach. First of all, congratulations. I just wondered if you could illuminate us on the process that landed you on Bronco Mendenhall.
Sure. Well, let me just take one step and say he is now our community's head coach and the coach of Utah State football. So I think there are a lot of Aggies out there that can be happy and realize the investment in football that we are now making at Utah State. Bronco Mendenhall, I mean, where do we start? He is simply put a leader of men. He has built successful programs. He believes in developing young people. And that is the intersection that we're at right now. He's a proven leader. He consistently emphasized character and discipline, and he's had a lot of success at BYU, Virginia, New Mexico. And so now, why not Utah State?
What was it about, and you just referenced some of it, and, Bronco, it's interesting, Diana, because there's really a direct line to tie here between what Bronco was asked to do at BYU and what you're asking him to do at Utah State. And Bronco took over after a really tumultuous couple of years in Provo under Gary Croton. And he won football games, which you have to do to keep your job, but he also really brought that program back to kind of culturally what they're used to. And, we have to call it how it is. It's been a rough couple of years up there in Logan. I think you've done a great job to get things kind of turned around and culturally kind of feeling like Utah State is back to where we want it to be. But what is it about the way Bronco has been able to approach the other tasks that attracted you to him the most to kind of rebuild this thing back to what Utah State is used to?
Bronco is unapologetically and authentically himself. He is driven by his values. That shines bright in every program that he has transformed. He loves the challenge, and he will repeatedly ignite our community. And that's exactly where we need to be right now. I think it's fantastic for Bronco and Holly Mendenhall to come back to Utah, their home, or at least Bronco's home specifically. I know Holly's from Montana, and she's very, very proud of that. But I think it's important when you have family as your value, and what an opportunity for him to come back and be with family and to transform a football program and be a part of a special community and a land-grant institution.
I wonder initially how this relationship started to bloom, because, of course, he's not the only coach you interviewed or kind of considered here. Was it a phone call you made initially? How did this whole thing kind of take shape?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Definitely had a process to determining who our next head coach would be. Thankful that there was a lot of interest across the country. Thankful for Nate Dreiling and his staff's efforts in our locker room, our young men this season who really outperformed and came together. And so it was a process of taking a very large pool, making it smaller, identifying our priorities, and then really truly committing to my belief that the state of Utah has fantastic high school football that we could develop, and then the belief that this job belonged to a sitting head coach, and just really holding on to that firmly and running towards that end zone.
How much did his ties to the state come into play? You know, we always kind of do this game here in the media locally about how unique Utah is and how, in order to have success here, you have to understand kind of how the state works, how the culture works. And that's not entirely true. There have been coaches that have come from the outside and have done just fine. Urban Meyer, Rick Majerus, I could keep going. Plenty of basketball coaches, football coaches at Utah State as well. But Bronco, of course, is a known commodity. He's a name here. He knows the state. How much of a benefit was that for you to consider when considering hiring Bronco?
You know, when you hire a head coach and you think about the program that you have and where you want to take your program, it starts with belief and believing. And, you know, we chant that before every competition at Utah State. And so once everyone starts to believe in our competitive nature as an athletics department, not only academically, but athletically, I do believe being from the state will even be that much more important. It's almost like a secret weapon that's not a secret, because you have all these intangibles, and you know the communities, you know the state, you know the high school coaches, you know what makes people tick and what the values are. And I'm clearly still learning that. So I am really excited to partner with Bronco and Holly and the Mendenhall family and continue to learn more, because that's really, truly important. And you bring up a really valid point. It is special. And he obviously has some secret sauce for that.
So ultimately, he had an offensive coordinator at New Mexico that is now employed by the University of Utah, as you know, Diana. I'm wondering what sort of progress has been made, if any at all, as far as filling out his staff up at Utah State.
Well, you can imagine first it was really coming together with his young men at New Mexico. You know, that's a team that achieved a lot this year, and no doubt it's really hard for them right now, and it's probably very, very emotional. So I've given Bronco time to work through that and work through his relationships at New Mexico respectfully, and close all of that up well and tight. He will be responsible for hiring his staff. That is his job, not mine. And so I'm sure that will unfold and become more formalized as the days and week continues.
So we had Coach Dreiling on the show multiple times, this year, and certainly a tough ask, Diana, of him this year, as you're well aware, and seemed like he handled it with grace. He was a really good interviewer. I wonder if you have any information about his future, whether or not he's part of the future at Utah State football.
Yeah, Nate is a fantastic human. He has great moral character. He loves working with young people, and he just has such a positive approach on everything. He's really someone to admire and someone that you want to be hugely successful. I'm thankful that he was willing to take on this challenge, knowing the difficulties and the adversity that our team had faced this year. And so I don't have a good answer for that. I want only but the best for Nate. And if there is an opportunity for him to stay in Logan, that would be fantastic. But I think that will be, that will continue to be unpacked and unfold as we keep moving through this new transition.
So as far as the timing, Diana, of this hire, how important was it for you to expedite this process? Because, the early signing period has come and gone, but the transfer portal opens up on Monday the 9th. How intentional was the expedited nature of the process?
Yeah, I want to, again, just give a good shout out to our staff and Nate and Cooper and DJ and how much they mined the talent in the state of Utah and how much they got after the high school prospect and developing young men this recruiting cycle. So that signing day was very successful for Utah State, but in this entire process, as we finished out the season and the candidates got smaller and smaller in the pool for me, really wanted to make sure that we had an announcement before Monday and signing day, in the portal, so that we could provide some security and some just closure for our current roster and then a new coach could come in and get to work real quickly with that timing.
All right, before I set you loose, I appreciate your time on a busy day. What is it about, I don't know if it's the water, I don't know if it's the cheese, and I'm not taking anything away from Jared Calhoun or anybody else, but the basketball culture in Logan is something that needs to be studied, because it's almost like, you know, you're there to develop these coaches that then go on to other schools, but the coaches you hire up there seem to really be able to continue a basketball culture that dates back decades and decades. What is it about the college basketball culture in Logan? Because Jared's undefeated, off to a great start so far.
You know, truly it's about people and the investment you put in relationships. Very fortunate that Jared and his wife, Sarah, said yes to Utah State. And he works every day tirelessly. I think sometimes I'm here late at night and I go out to my car and his truck is still here. So I'm just thankful for his tenacious work ethic and his deeper care for our young men. That roster, his bench loves him and his staff. Everything that he brings to Logan, and it's truly family, and that's valued in this community much more than in other communities. And so that's a great cornerstone that we continue to just reinforce and build upward with Utah State basketball. And we're fortunate. Winning is really hard. And I think sometimes, we just expect it and think of nothing less.
Well, Diana, thank you so much for your time. It feels like a home run. I really was not expecting this to culminate in the hire of Bronco Mendenhall, but it certainly has. So congrats on the process, and I'll wish you the best of luck, okay?
Thanks so much. Hope to see you in Logan sometime soon.
All right. Diana Sabo, the 12th athletic director in the history of Utah State, the first woman athletic director in the history of the school. And Bronco Mendenhall has landed as the new head coach of Utah State. According to reports, that is a 6-year deal for Bronco. He's going to make just over $2 million per year in base salary. Then, of course, plenty of incentives, because that's kind of how it goes. I do wonder what the future of Nate Dreiling holds. He was a guest on the show a couple of different times. He took over a tough task, and it didn't go well because I think expectations after Coach Anderson was relieved of his duties. It was hard to analyze who they could potentially be. You know, some players left. I'm sure a lot of players were just kind of disillusioned. Nate was brought there to be their defensive coordinator. Bronco is going to have to build out his staff. The offensive coordinator he had in New Mexico is now coaching at Utah. So an odd day in a lot of ways. But congratulations to Bronco Mendenhall. Congratulations to Utah State. And we'll continue the college football conversation coming up next with Max Brown on a Friday right here on ESPN 700. College football conference championship weekend gets rolling tonight. And then throughout the course of tomorrow, a lot of big games. A lot of things still need to be kind of ironed out. Excited to bring on our next guest to talk some college football, my buddy Max Brown, on a Friday. Max, happy Friday. How you doing?
Happy Friday, Spence. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. So we've had an unexpected busy news cycle over the past 24, 48 hours, and the University of Utah has been looking to add an offensive coordinator, and a couple of guys said no thank you and took other jobs, but Jason Beck has been hired as Utah's offensive coordinator now. He played quarterback at Brigham Young, and the numbers at New Mexico were really good. They've got a quarterback in the transfer portal named Devin Dampier. A lot of people are wondering if he's going to land here in Salt Lake City. 484.2 yards per game, fourth best in the nation. What are the biggest roadblocks when it comes to trying to replicate that type of production in P4 football in the Big 12 next year?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumps out to me, too, after just, briefly diving into his background is, what kind of identity do you want to establish with being the Utah offensive coordinator versus like his previous stops? You go to a place like Syracuse, you go to a place like Virginia, even a place like New Mexico, like there isn't a huge cultural distinction about those spots. So I think you can kind of just, do what you want to do as an offensive coordinator, right? Whatever that philosophy is. But Utah's unique in that, and I remember talking about this, years ago, 7-8 years ago with you guys, and that, Utah, you'd have to think that consistently you're going to be able to get a big physical offensive line. So as an offensive coordinator, how does that change your approach? If you're a pass-happy guy, well, then you might think about running the ball a little bit more. If you're a strictly shotgun guy, like, is there more under center action? And then, vice versa. If you're more, under center only, old school pro style, which, he's not necessarily that way, well, then I know at times Utah has been craving for more explosiveness at different eras, of course, in the past. So that to me is the first thing that I think he's going to have to navigate of, hey, I'm at a place like Utah who culturally and the guy that I'm able to recruit might be different than the three other stops that I've been to before this, either calling plays or being a quarterback coach. And is it just, hey, I'm going to take the exact same system that I had at New Mexico and Syracuse and bring it to Salt Lake? I don't think that's necessarily the right approach for any coach at any stop. But to what level does he, alter things as a result of the guy that Utah can get consistently?
I'll ask you a follow-up about the quarterback that was with him at New Mexico, Devin Dampier, who, again, is in the transfer portal. Should he land in Salt Lake? Very same question, quite frankly, Max. What are the biggest challenges and roadblocks between a quarterback who really put up great numbers at New Mexico in the Mountain West to potentially a quarterback playing for Utah trying to do the same thing in the Big 12?
The number one thing that sticks out to me is just the spotlight on you is going to be a lot brighter. I mean, even as I said out loud, it reminds me of a guy like, when Cam Ward came up from Incarnate Ward to Washington State, and you could see all the talent, but you also could see his brain going a million miles an hour, because it's different when you're kind of the lower level guy. Maybe people aren't expecting you to do as much, and it's easy to kind of be in your own cocoon and put up big numbers. But then when you come to a school like Utah, a team that is arguably the most disappointed fan base right now in college football in terms of how the season went out. Maybe at this point, Utah fans have kind of come to grips with it. But if you would have asked me that, 2 months ago, a month ago, you probably would have put Utah right up there. And so he's going to have this, if he were to come, a little bit of this savior mold, and coming off the back of, in that scenario, presumably off the back of Cam Rising's incredible run as a Utah Ute quarterback. So that just comes with a lot of pressure, and with pressure comes a greater microscope, and a greater microscope can lead to overthinking and just be and a sense of, I guess, just being a little bit more uncomfortable than you might have been at a place like New Mexico.
All right, speaking of Cam Rising, Max, I know we've talked about it, but it's topical because it's still newsworthy, noteworthy that there's the potential that he will be back for an 8th season. Now, Coach Witt has said on a couple of occasions that's up to Cam. I wonder what you think that conversation would sound like if Cam did walk into Kyle's office and say, I want to come back for year 8. You think that's something that would be embraced with open arms at this point?
I knew this question was coming up when I was logging on because I was like, man, I'd be asking the same thing if I was in your seat. And I go both ways, which I imagine is probably how most Utah fans are thinking about it. On one side, it's what arguably the best quarterback, if not the best quarterback in Utah history, at least from a production awards championship standpoint. And so are you ever going to like kick him out the door? I find that hard to believe. On the other side, you know, it is if this was a tough season, 2024, you know, does it just drag out if you allow Cam to return? And does it hurt Wilson's production and growth if he doesn't know if he is the guy? And I think that's a very real conversation that you need to have, in addition to just the health concerns for Cam. I'll straddle the middle there a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle does some of the same, assuming you don't go into the portal. I do think there's a world, especially with a guy like Coach Whittingham, who, you know, he's got the credibility. He doesn't have a fan base that is going to second guess every decision that he makes, which is not necessarily the case for other fan bases. And so I think you could do a scenario where you give Cam the chance to, hey, take the reins and be the guy, but still giving Wilson more of the ones reps than you would to a normal backup quarterback in spring ball and throughout summer, with the understanding that, hey, he is very much our guy for the future. And Cam, hey, we're riding with you in 2025, assuming you can stay healthy. And I guess I just say that where Utah has a unique scenario where I think you could thread the needle because you have a hometown, exciting young quarterback who on paper might not leave. And then on the flip side, you have a beyond experienced quarterback that you don't necessarily need him to get every single rep under the sun. And I think there's a world to prep both as a starter, and maybe you're shorter with that leash than you would have been in years past from an injury perspective with Cam.
I may have buried the lead a little bit, Max, because I suppose the question I should ask you is, if Cam doesn't come back, do you feel like the answer under center was in the quarterback room? Or do you think if Cam doesn't come back and it's Isaac, it's Brandon Rose, do you still feel like hitting the portal to bring in a seasoned vet is the approach? What are your thoughts on the current quarterback situation at Utah if Cameron Rising does not come back next year?
I think in today's climate, you have to do your due diligence, and I think you have to be out there in the portal and seeing what's out there in terms of who is available. Like you just never know, you know, what veteran guy might be looking around. I would, on paper, not be in favor of bringing in another young guy because I think that gives the wrong message to, hey, we're trying to develop young quarterbacks into being guys in the future. But if there is a established starter, older guy, 1-year rental that has played at a high level, I mean, I ironically literally saw Miller Moss, USC starting quarterback last year, at the grocery store yesterday. He did not say Utah was on his list, but like that type of guy, if he was enamored with Utah and was like, hey, there could be something here, like that type of guy, I think could make sense and allow Wilson to, you know, grow and develop and wait his turn for another year. I don't think that would be a death sentence to his Utah Ute career by any means. And so that type of scenario would make the most sense to me. But getting another young guy to come in there and compete that hasn't really proven himself, I think Wilson showed enough upside that that scenario wouldn't do anything for me.
Before we move off of the Utah stuff, just and there's no way of knowing. I'm just asking your take on the dynamic, because where I'm at today, Max, is since we have not heard an announcement about Coach Witt retiring, I just believe he's coming back. There's still conversation about it. But if you're a coach under contract, you don't need to call a press conference to say, I'll be back. You just show up and do your job. And Kyle has been actively involved in the early signing day and the transfer portal, which opens up on December the 9th. Are you kind of the same mindset that since there has been no announcement, it just feels like Coach Witt's back on the sideline next year?
It's a good question. I don't know if I'm that far, just because I feel like, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if he got through this whole recruiting cycle, and then once the buzz settles down and we get into true off-season mode in February, if it's like he tries to be a calm kind of exit stage left. Obviously, it won't be calm because Coach Whittingham is historic. But I could see that type of dynamic, especially because they've already mentioned the coach in waiting, so it wouldn't necessarily be like totally blindsiding the team. I just go to right now, like so much of it is optics wise. Like, right, if you would have announced that he's leaving last week, well, then you jeopardize your current recruiting class. Well, then if you announce that he's leaving today, well, then it's like, oh, well, why didn't you do this 4 days ago before guys signed on the dotted line? And then, if you wait another month, and I know, bowl game is not a factor necessarily, but like, you get through the holiday season and then make that decision. I could see a world where that happens. So I guess I don't read into these past couple weeks nearly to that level.
Fair enough. One of the things that I always discuss as it pertains to the Utah-BYU rivalry is the unique nature of the game. And that's why I think it's among the best rivalries in college football. As a guy that really knows the national landscape, I mean, Jason Beck played at BYU. Coach Witt played at BYU. Kalani coached at Utah. A-Rod coached at Utah. Jay Hill coached at Utah. The cross-pollination of the coaching staffs, to me, makes it a rivalry that kind of stands on its own. Is there another rivalry in college football that has as many coaches on staff that at some point either played or coached on the other team?
No, and I don't even think it's close. Like, the only scenarios that I'm trying to run in my head is like some of the SEC rivalries where, if Saban's rocking and rolling and then his disciples then all go to Georgia, or his disciples all go to Ole Miss, and not that Alabama Ole Miss is the rivalry that BYU Utah is, but it's unique. And I think I'm sure the gravitational pull to the state of Utah from a religion standpoint, it has to play a factor in that, which is unique and awesome in its own right. But no, I cannot think of a single other rivalry that is the case, and in large part because we see the college football landscape. 4 decades ago, it might have been, hey, we have to hire a Florida guy if we're a Florida school, or we have to hire a California guy if we're a California school. Nowadays, you'll see Mario Cristobal get offered from Oregon, and then he'll get offered from Miami on both sides of the coast, which I think hurts the scenario you're talking about of regional rivalries having coaches that overlap.
One more question pertaining to the local scene, then we'll move on to some conference championship stuff. But Utah State lands on Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco Mendenhall is back in the state of Utah after 1 year at New Mexico. Prior to that, of course, at University of Virginia. And, it's interesting, Max, because Bronco was asked to kind of reclaim BYU glory of the past back in the day, taking over for Gary Croton. And Gary had one really good year and then really lost control of his locker room. And there was a lot of unsavory behavior by players that is not necessarily commonplace down at Brigham Young. And it's not the very same dynamic, but Utah State's had a rough calendar year with moving on from Coach Anderson and the ugly scene that took place up there. So what do you make of Utah State bringing Bronco Mendenhall back to the state of Utah?
First reaction is I think it's a good hire for, a couple reasons. I thought one, he's just obviously coached at a high level in the region, in the state. And so I would imagine a lot of his blueprint recruiting strategy, philosophy would be rinse and repeat. And rinse and repeat sometimes kind of has a negative connotation because obviously you want to stay cutting edge and stay innovative. But I guess there's proof of concept, which is not usually the case for most head coaching hires. Usually it's, hey, this is the vision I have. This is what I hope to become. Bronco can say, hey, man, this is literally what we did at the other school within the same state. And obviously the scenarios are different. But I think that's attractive. I think Utah State's, transition into the Pac-12 and that just naturally being a new dynamic. I think the timing of that is awesome with a new head coach where you can start fresh on both paths and try to, reestablish a culture there. And then from an even more high level, and, I called a couple of Virginia games this year, so was out there, talking with Tony Elliott, who obviously took the job after Bronco Mendenhall at Virginia, and we were just talking about, just the Bronco path there a little bit. And I remember from afar, and I was playing there, I remember being like, man, why did Bronco leave BYU for Virginia? Like, to me, and maybe this is me just being a West Coast guy, and I grew up in a decent Mormon population in Sammamish, Washington. Like, I was like, BYU is a better job than Virginia. Like, why'd you leave? And I was playing again, so I don't remember all the nuances. But I'd imagine some of it's like, him coming back to his comfort zone of what he knows he can do well and what he knows he can recruit and excel at because he's shown that he can do it. So I'd be excited if I was a Utah State fan. I think it's a good hire.
All right, conference championship weekend starts tonight, 6 o'clock, UNLV, Boise State. Big 12 fans will be cheering for UNLV so they can potentially get one of those top 4 buys, and we'll get there in a moment. But Boise State is a 4-point favorite. What do you make of tonight's Mountain West Conference championship game? Who do you like and why?
I like Genty for the Heisman, so I want Boise to. I like Boise to ultimately get it done, but UNLV is one of the most intriguing teams in the country, not only because of everything that went down NIL-wise in the first month of the season, but for those that have not tuned into UNLV, their go-go offense is just incredibly unique, and especially for a X's and O's guy like me, the way they blend RPO and triple option and downfield shots, and then Haj Malik Williams, their quarterback as well, is pretty dynamic. It's just a fun offense to watch, and it's the type of offense that defensively, if you come in and swing and miss with your game plan and your safeties and linebackers aren't fitting their run lanes, UNLV's offense can get after you. So this is a scary matchup, but I think the physicality of Boise State and old trusty Ashton Genty get it done.
You like Genty over Travis Hunter, huh?
I do. I think one thing that goes largely underappreciated is Boise State is 11-1 and about to be the 4th seed in the college football playoff. I feel like the general national media is talking about it as if Genty's stat line is like RG3 or like a who's in like another 3-loss Heisman winner type of guy, where it's like, oh, he's putting up his stats and he's exciting and we see him on SportsCenter top 10 and all that. No, Boise State's winning. And oh, by the way, their one loss was against a game that I'm sure Boise State fans feel like they should have won against Oregon. So sometimes I feel like the team dynamic, which is a factor, it feels like in all other Heisman races, is not working to Genty's favor in this year's race.
That's very fair. All right, let's move over to the games tomorrow. Let's start with the Big 12 championship game. We're going to have that game on our radio station coming up tomorrow, 10 a.m. Arizona State is 1.5-point favorite now. That line's moved a couple of times towards the way of Iowa State. Obviously, being a Big 12 market, we'll be very interested in this game. How do you think it plays out?
The Pac-12 guy, I mean, we'll ride with ASU.
All right.
Every single time I think that ASU is going to stub their toe or lose momentum, I actually picked Arizona last week against the spread because I just was like, man, feels like one of these weeks the emotional energy of Kenny Dillingham and that ASU team's gonna stub their toe or fall flat, and they continue to respond every single week. Sam Levitt's been fun, and all us original Pac-12 folks know all about Cam Scattaboo. Now the country knows about him, and give the rock to number 4. Good things will happen.
Georgia, Texas, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta, Georgia, Texas, 2.5-point favorite. Who do you like out of the SEC?
I don't see. I mean, man, I go back to that matchup that they had earlier on this season when Georgia absolutely manhandled Texas. Texas had to bench their starting quarterback because he was just making mental errors and not being able to get through his progressions. I think there could be a world where that same short leash mentality comes to the park. I think that Georgia defensive line shows up again. I think it's closer. But I still have that game in the back of my mind. It wasn't even like a 2-score game and it got away from them. Georgia absolutely manhandled Texas. That whatever Kool-Aid Kirby's drinking in terms of, hey, no one's giving our team a shot, his guys continue to buy into that, or at least they seem to buy into that. So I know Georgia hasn't been perfect all season, and Texas got it done obviously last week. But I'll go the Bulldogs getting it done.
Big Ten championship, Oregon and Penn State, Lucas Oil, Indianapolis. The Ducks are a 3.5-point favorite. Do you think they complete the undefeated season?
This one's fascinating to me because I'm a Penn State fan. Like, in years past for James Franklin, like this would have been the game. This would have been a huge game. This would have been the type of game that could change the narrative of James Franklin and Penn State in big games. But it feels like even if Penn State were to win, the narrative would not change for James Franklin. He would still have to prove it versus Ohio State, prove it versus Michigan, and prove it in the college football playoff this year. So the dynamic there is just interesting and fascinating to me. But I'm going to trust what history has shown me. And it's shown me that in big games, Penn State's playmakers have not been able to be activated. I won't even say that they haven't shown up, because it feels like sometimes it's not even like they're, getting those opportunities. I still want to see more from Drew Aller in big games. I think he's got a ton of talent, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's a Sunday quarterback someday, but I'm still waiting for that moment where he turns the corner. And Oregon doesn't have a weakness. I guess if Penn State were to win this game, it would have to be a physical, gritty game. Penn State's got to be able to run the ball on the Oregon's defensive line. That would be the pathway. But I haven't seen anything from Oregon that gives me concerns. I think the Ducks get it done.
Nightcap is Clemson, SMU out of the ACC. SMU a 2.5-point favorite. Their only loss is to BYU. And I think this is another scenario. Big 12 fans cheering for the upset. What do you think happens out of the ACC before I set you loose?
Yeah, I've covered both these teams in person this year. One thing that is not getting enough chatter is Clemson's offensive line is banged up, to say the least. They were playing a third-string left tackle when I had them in person 3 weeks ago. So I have tons of concern about their ability to get it done up front against an SMU defensive line that they don't have guys that are scary, that'll scare you, but they can be active for sure. I think Kevin Jennings is one of the most underrated quarterbacks, SMU signal caller, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country. So I think SMU finds a way to get it done. That chip on their shoulder with Rhett Lashley saying, we're not getting the credit that we deserve. And I haven't been overly impressed with Clemson this year, especially in the trenches. So the Mustangs get it done.
All right, Max, thanks for the time. It's going to be a fun weekend. I appreciate it. Enjoy it, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Thanks, Spence. Appreciate you.
All right, Max Brown, college football analyst over the CW, did a ton of stuff with the Pac-12, really entertaining college personality, both on Instagram, TikTok, as well as Twitter. At MaxBrown4 is where you find him. All right, we'll do more college football, react to the new offensive coordinator hire at the U, and Bronco Mendenhall up to Utah State during the 5 o'clock hour. We'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock. We have Army and Tulane tonight. It's the American Conference Championship on the radio side of things here on ESPN 700. Let's welcome in Ryan from the Dish Professionals. 3 very affordable options for internet, wireless, and cable television. Dial 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan?
Just so easy to save just a ton of money. Call us up. Take advantage of the deals. If you think you're overpaying, as Spence likes to say, you probably are. Call us up if you've got an oversized bill. You saw that rate increase. I mean, this is crazy when I hear about all these rate increases. And a lot of people just don't realize that their bill just went up 20% in some cases. Call us and see what we can do for you. We can save truly thousands of dollars. It sounds crazy, but that's what we see. I've had a few customers that have allowed us to help them with their mobile phone and internet and TV, and those are like $300 a month. We're talking like the next couple of years, it's like $7,000. Call us and upgrade. Get the biggest DVR out there. Auto records your favorite games. Auto hops commercials. You also get a neat little extra right now. We'll throw in Netflix free for the next 2 years. And yes, Netflix is built into the system like a channel, so easy and simple there, along with YouTube and Amazon Video Prime. In fact, now you can add any app you want and have it work on all your TVs, simple and easy. Call us today and upgrade. Ask about the internet solutions. I got an internet provider that is offering a free 50-inch TV if you sign up. This is a neat little extra promotion, or a $150 gift card, plus the mobile phone stuff. Guys, use the same cell towers. I'm serious about this. Same cell towers are using the best coverage in Salt Lake. You get a free iPhone 16 Pro or Samsung S24. You'll probably spend $20 or $30 a month less what you're currently paying. The process is relatively simple. We just set it up. Your number ports when you get the new phone, and you're good to go, and you pay a lot less money. 424-DISH. Call us today. Remember, we always guarantee the best price, and Dish does send out individual offers once in a while. There's a bunch that got sent out in Salt Lake. They have an extra special offer. It's addressed to you. It only is good for just you. If you get those, call us up. We'll give you that, plus dinner at JCW's, and have you installed next day. 424-DISH, 801-424 dish.
All right. Want to tell you about my friends at Big O Tires. It's their extended Black Friday sale. It ends on December the 8th. You can buy 3 and get 1 free on Big O brand tires and select sets of all their premium tires. They're offering their tip-top healthy car special for $99.95 right now, and that includes a full synthetic oil change and a wiper blade replacement. Big O Tires has financing options to fit every budget and situation. Walk-ins are welcome, or you can schedule an appointment over the phone. Visit BigOTires.com to find a location near you. All right, 3 hours down, 1 hour to go. Some college football to take you home during the 5 o'clock hour of the program right here on ESPN 700. All right, what's going on? Drive at 5 time. Your commute home on a Friday afternoon starts right now. Been another one of those like 40-degree, somewhat sunny, somewhat chilly days. The inversion has settled in. If you're new to Salt Lake, this is kind of the deal. At some point, we'll probably get a storm to blow this thing out of the water. But as of right now, it's just one of those December Friday afternoons. Happy Friday to you. Happy weekend to you. Congratulations, you made it. It is time for Conference Championship Weekend in college football. It starts tonight. UNLV Boise State will kick off at 6 o'clock at Albertson Stadium in Boise, Idaho, where Boise is a 4-point favorite over UNLV. Of course, if you're a Big 12 fan, probably cheering for UNLV. Kind of an odd dynamic with the new expanded 12-team CFP, where if you're Boise State, you have two options. One is win and probably a top 4 seed and a bye. The other is lose and like fall out completely, potentially with only 2 losses, a loss to Oregon, the best team in the country, where you probably should have won that game anyway, and a loss in your conference championship game. But one of the avenues for the Big 12 to get that top 4 seed and a bye is an upset tonight. UNLV getting that done against Boise State. Tulane and Army for the American Athletic Championship. You can hear that game on this radio station right after we say goodnight at 6 o'clock. Reminder, tomorrow, big college football games on ESPN 700. We are your home for the biggest events in the market, pro football, college football, NBA playoffs. Tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m., it's the Big 12 Championship game. It's Iowa State and Arizona State, AT&T Stadium in Arlington. ASU is a 1.5-point favorite in that game. Following the Big 12 Championship, it's going to be the SEC Championship, Georgia and Texas in Atlanta. And then we'll move over to Utah men's basketball at 4:30. They're taking on St. Mary's. So a big preseason test for Craig and his team tomorrow. So busy day on the station. Make sure to stay tuned for all the action. The 5 o'clock hour of the drive tonight is brought to you by Advanced Window Products, the #1 rated window company in Utah. Locally owned, sales and installation are in-house, no middleman markup. This is Nate Orchard's company, the mayor of Sac Lake City, Jake Weber. Great people, great local families here to take care of our local community. They build, install, and guarantee for life. Your lifetime warranty is serviced by a local team with labor, glass, and parts all included. You can save energy with custom rebates from Dominion Energy. Financing available. Save now and pay later. They're doing their winter football special this week, which is $2,500 off when you purchase 10 windows or more, so you can beat the rush and order today. From the factory to your front door in 8 weeks or less. Give them a call at 801-850-9100 and visit them at advancedwindows.com. Advanced Window Products at 801-850-9100 and advancedwindows.com. All right, kind of an unexpected busy news cycle today locally with the college football landscape. Utah State has hired Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco, of course, made a name around here as a coach down at Brigham Young. One season in New Mexico where he went 5-7. Diana Sabo, the athletic director from Utah State, will join us to discuss this decision-making process and why she landed on Bronco. It's kind of an interesting dynamic to consider. In a way, Bronco is asked to do the same thing at Utah State in Logan that he was asked to do at BYU and Provo. Kind of ultimately clean it up a little bit. It's not a perfect parallel, different things. You know, Gary Croton, who had a really good year, really good start to his career as BYU's head coach, simply had some athletes that did very unsavory things that was a poor reflection of BYU football and the culture down there in Provo. And Bronco brought that program back to really what they wanted it to be. He won a lot of games. He did a good job. I would say he did a good, not great job at BYU, and ultimately elected to leave Brigham Young after a decade down there. And by his own admission, didn't think independence was sustainable. Now, he would have had to wait another 4 or 5 years for BYU to land in a conference and then tripled his salary, if we could call it how it is. So spent some time at Virginia, early retirement, doing a little fishing up in Montana, and now he's back in college football coaching after 1 year at New Mexico. He is now landed as the head coach at Utah State. New Mexico also lost an offensive coordinator today, and that offensive coordinator is the new offensive coordinator at the University of Utah. After flirting with a couple of candidates, University of Utah has landed on Jason Beck as their next offensive coordinator. Of course, Andy Ludwig, who will always be remembered for his great years here and should be remembered for that, steps down this year after a struggle, to say the least, on offense. And Jason Beck is now your offensive coordinator here in Salt Lake for the University of Utah. Ranked 4th in total offense last year in New Mexico, averaging 484 yards per game. They scored 49 offensive touchdowns, 294 points, averaged 253.6 rushing yards per game, and that was the 5th best rushing attack in the country. My guess is Coach Witt really loved that. 28th ranked scoring offense, averaging 33.5 points per game. Jason is 44 years old. He spent 1 year in New Mexico with Bronco Mendenhall after spending 2 seasons with Syracuse, where he was the offensive coordinator and the quarterbacks coach in 2022 and 2023. He called plays for Syracuse 1 year. They averaged 25.5 points per game through 12 games. That was the 3rd worst in the ACC that year, just ahead of Wake Forest and Pitt. And prior to that, Jason was the quarterbacks coach at Virginia, where he was with Bronco. And, of course, spent some time down in Brigham Young, not just as a player, but also as a coach. When he was with BYU, he helped develop Taysom Hill. That's kind of his claim to fame with Brigham Young. And this is just another example of one of, if not the most unique college football rivalries in the country, where you have Kyle Whittingham as a former BYU player, now Jason Beck as a former BYU player. You have Kalani Sitake, a former Utah coach. You have Aaron Roderick, a former Utah coach, and Jay Hill, a former Utah player and coach. And I could keep going. Sione Pua and others. It really is a dynamic that does not exist anywhere else in all of college football, with a cross-pollination of the coaching staffs. We talked to Max Brown about this earlier. He had some very interesting comments. So we've been waiting all week long for some official news after just rumors regarding a couple of offensive coordinators that apparently Utah was long for, namely Ben Arbuckle, who lands in Oklahoma, and Matt Leftwich, who's now going to be the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech. So a couple of interesting ancillary pieces here, some side notes. Devin Dampier, who was the quarterback at New Mexico, playing for Jason Beck and Bronco Mendenhall, has announced his intention to enter the transfer portal. Dampier was fine through the air, but he did throw 12 picks. He was really good on the ground, over 1,000 yards, 1,166 yards, 19 touchdowns. And their running back, Eli Sanders, is also in the transfer portal, who was a 1,000-yard back and had 9 touchdowns of his own. So, University of Utah making this announcement official after some rumors surfaced yesterday. And now we wait. Now we see. I'm not a big hey, you won the day guy. You won the press conference guy. Now we simply have to wait and see. So those are kind of the main local storylines that have dominated the landscape of media here on the program today. The Utah Jazz are in action tonight. Did you even know that? You probably didn't. They're taking on the Portland Trailblazers. That's going to be an 8 o'clock Mountain Time tip. Portland is 8-14. The Jazz are 4-17. Week 14 of pro football got rolling last night with a really fun Thursday night game as the Lions were able to get it done against the Packers, but a fun game. So busy weekend of both college and pro football on the show today. And, of course, a lot of college football has dominated the news cycle and the landscape of what we've talked about today. So if you missed any of the show so far, Dave McMenamin and Zach Harper, 2 really good NBA guests, stopped by early on. We talked a little Utah Hockey Club with Neil Smith, who stops by weekly as the Utah Hockey Club is back in action with a doubleheader on the road starting tomorrow, going through Sunday. They'll be back at home coming up next Tuesday, I believe, and then some college football with Max Brown. Really interesting to consider. Obviously, as we've talked about, we do cover these topics in a vacuum. When it comes to a sports talk radio show, you react to the news cycle of the day. You don't do a ton of the whole big picture stuff. And so, of course, we'll hone in on the transfer portal for Utah. A bevy of Utah players hit the portal today. The transfer portal officially opens on the 9th, but obviously a lot of players making their intention known. But from a big picture standpoint, I've got to be careful here, but I think I'm safe to say this. There's some really exciting potential news that is much more important, in my opinion, than who the offensive coordinator is and who your starting quarterback is going to be, that I think we're going to hear about over the next couple of months as it pertains to the future of Utah football. Now, it's interesting to me to consider So right now, I think it's fair to say the hierarchy of sports products here in our market. It feels like college football is kind of taken over as the number one product. Utah football, probably the preeminent sports product in our market. BYU football, certainly with the year they just had, every time BYU is good, their fans love content, so it's better for everybody. It's a rising tide. College football has kind of permeated throughout the course of our market. And with a pro basketball team that's unserious about winning, it's easy for them to take away some of that market share, I guess is how I'll put it. But I continue to look at the timeline of the next 4 to 5 years about what college football could and will look like when it actually is done with the ever-changing landscape. And we're not going to have to worry about Big 12, Big 10, SEC. It simply is going to settle into one league. If I could continue to talk about the model we've discussed on this show over and over and over. And it will look a lot like pro football, and essentially it will be pro football. Essentially it already is. And we've discussed on the show with Max Brown from Extra Points and CK, our guy from The Athletic, about the desire of some in college football to simply move into the pro model sooner rather than later. And by the way, I think that's what they should do, okay? Now, when it comes to administrators and university presidents, they're the ones that push back on this because they do not want these athletes as employees of their institution with all the complications that would bring. Not to mention the collateral damage to athletic departments if they lose football and the revenue that brings in. What will it look like when it settles? No one really knows, and the football program will, not just at Utah, but throughout the course of most schools in the country, with the exceptions of like the UConn basketball program or the Duke basketball program, most schools will continue to need and rely upon the revenue brought in from the football program. So what will that look like when football breaks away from the NCAA, which they're going to do? It's not happening tomorrow. It's probably not happening next year. But I do think in 4 to 5 years, there will be a seismic, and I'll call it final shift in college football that moves over into a pro model, okay? And it's the main reason why I've always pushed back on the whole, like, okay, BYU's in the Big 12, so let's become Big 12 fans. No. Like Utah's now, they left the Pac-12. Now they're in the Big 12. Let's get on that Big 12 wagon. Not me at all. I'm more concerned about what Utah individually is doing behind the scenes to make sure that they're on the right side when college football has their final and seismic shift. It will be seismic, and I do think it will be final. And I do think it will look a lot like pro football. Now, what do you have to do as a school, as an institution, and as an athletic department to be prepared for that moment? Because the reason I brought up like the hierarchy of sports in our market, I think it's hard to articulate, and we'll just stick with the Utah football narrative here. I think it's hard to articulate just how massive Utah football as a brand would be, and Utah, the University of Utah as a public institution would be, if Utah is in the 40-team, whatever it is, new professional football league that now college football has turned into. And that's what it's gonna be. And if Utah is in, it essentially will be almost, not entirely, but almost like having an NFL team in Salt Lake City. It won't be the same. But college football is the only product that at least nips at the heels of pro football. We've become such a football-dominant society that the NBA, the days of the NBA even living in the same stratosphere of pro football are long over. It's really been since the late 90s where you could even be kind of analogous, and even back then it wasn't close. It was just closer than it is right now. And so it's paramount for Taylor Randall and Mark Harlan and our local legislators and our governor and whoever else is involved to come up with creative ways to make Utah an undeniable yes to the powers that be when they decide who is going to be part of that group. And it's going to be more than wins and losses. And quite frankly, with the way that this football season just kind of unfolded, the old narrative of Utah football being dominant in their space right now is not necessarily correct. We'll see what happens next season. It's more important to be able to make sure that your financials are in order. It's more important to make sure that you are liquid and you are able to financially support a football program and an institution in a very unique way. And you have to come up with solutions. You have to come up with different approaches. Okay. And it is going to be on the decision makers at the University of Utah, and quite frankly, powerful people with deep pockets that want to partner with Utah to put Utah in a place that when college football changes again, seismically and probably finally, Utah's on the right side. Because where you don't want to be is on the other side. Now, I do think football will exist for schools that aren't in this new model, but it won't be near on the same level. Because think about the media deal that you could create if you have the top 40 brands in college football. Think about the bidding war you could create between ABC, ESPN, Fox, CBS, whatever it is. And you could do what the NFL does and put games on multiple different networks and still have them write you massive checks. That's the game changer. And so I think behind the scenes, I think I'm safe to say this, there are things happening with Utah as an institution, University of Utah as a school, and the Utah Athletic Department that are really, really exciting. That should be announced over the next few months, and I'll just kind of leave it there. But yes, today we're responding and reacting to the hire of the offensive coordinator in a vacuum and discussing the transfer portal and players coming and going in a vacuum. But the far more interesting thing, in my opinion, is what Utah football is about to do to position themselves to be on the right side of that line when that line inevitably comes. Utah State has a new coach. His name is Bronco Mendenhall. Their athletic director, Donna Sabo, will stop by coming up next on a Friday on ESPN 700. All right, conference championship weekend gets rolling tonight with a couple of games. You can hear one on our station. Coming up in a bit, it's Tulane and Army from West Point, New York. Tulane's a 5-point favorite, even though Army's top 25 team at 10-1. And then also UNLV Boise tonight at Albertson Stadium up in Boise, Idaho, where Boise is a 4-point favorite. So a lot of fun college football coming up this weekend. Unfortunately, no local flavor, but a lot of interesting storylines. Busy night in pro basketball. The Jazz are up in Portland tonight. The Jazz are bad. The Blazers are bad. So I don't know. If you want to watch, good for you. Lakers are in Atlanta tonight. Quinn Snyder has the Hawks playing well. They've won 5 straight games. We got the Bucks and the Celtics, and a good one on ESPN, the T-Wolves and the Warriors. So a lot of pro basketball as well. Jack Bomeister has entered the transfer portal. Several Utes entered the transfer portal today. Speaking of the Utes, time now for your chance to win some Utah men's basketball tickets. Text Utes right now to 33986 for a chance to win Utah men's basketball tickets. The Utah men's basketball team has a good one tomorrow in St. Mary's. Preseason action continues. So there you go. So busy weekend. We have conference championship games on our radio station tomorrow, starting with the Big 12 championship, moving over to the SEC championship before we go over to Utah men's hoops coming up against Utah State. So there you go. Not going to lie, man. Ready for the weekend. Are you? I'm ready to chill. I'm ready to – I don't know if it's the inversion.
Doesn't help.
I don't know if it's the chaos of the week.
Doesn't help.
Feels like it's time for the weekend.
And we get college football conference championship football.
Yes, we do.
Not only this weekend, but literally as we're hanging up the show today, we get to go home and watch, as you mentioned, or tune in Army Tulane on the station as we hang up. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm glad it's the weekend. But as we hang up talking about football, I'm going to go home and immediately start watching it.
Who's this Blair Angulo gentleman that you've retweeted? Is he like a legitimate college football source?
Yes. I wouldn't have shared it if he is not. Blair is, if there is anyone in the recruiting spheres that actually has a pulse on like regional stuff out west, it's Blair. He's been on the show with me before, that's our. If Steve Bartle did like the entire West Coast, that's Blair Angulo. He knows the landscape of the sport, and there's a report out there that Isaac Wilson might entertain the transfer portal. To me, wouldn't be a big surprise.
We should get him on the show.
Blair or Isaac?
Both.
Book
them both for next week, deal?
You got it.
All right, let's get out of here. And coming up next, college football. Porter, what comes our way on a Monday edition of the show?
On a Monday edition of the show, Tom Haberstroh stops by for the NBA Daily Assist. Of course, Josh Furlong, our weekly check-in with the Utes beat writer. Hopefully, Blair Angulo. We'll check in, maybe get some recruiting guys to give us an update on the portal stuff from the week. But we will hear from Bill Busch, the coaching changes from the week that was. A lot to discuss that with him. He'll actually be on site in Las Vegas with Alex Smith for a College Football Hall of Fame induction. So Bill Busch will talk some coaching, talk some college football offseason, maybe some conference title weekend as well.
Like Billy Busch, the host of the Entertainment Tonight show, like that dude?
Yeah, the guy with the hot mic guy.
They grab him by that guy who got the audio. Is that the guy who's joining us?
Different Bill Busch.
Oh, all right.
Coach Bill Busch.
Will you effort the other Billy Busch?
I can send I'm going to send a request to Isaac Wilson, Blair Angulo, and Billy Busch.
I'll interview that dude.
Why not?
Yeah. What's the update on Chappelle?
Nothing yet. No crickets still.
Gervais?
Crickets, man. I need your New York Broadway connections for some of these entertainment guys.
All right. We'll figure it out. All right, that'll do it. Enjoy your weekend. You guys have earned it. So have we. So it's time to hibernate. That's my plan for 72 hours. Special thank you today. Dave McMiniman, Zach Harper, Neil Smith, Diana Sabu as well, and Max Brown. For any of the sound you may have missed, go to the website, ESPN700sports.com. Download our pod. It's the Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get shows. Also, check out the ESPN 700 app in the App Store or the Google Play Store. He's Porter. I'm Spence. Say goodnight. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Talk to you on Monday right here on ESPN 700.